Live continuing coverage of the 96 vote. Once again, from ABC News World Headquarters in New York, Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our political coverage of the election 1996. Thank you for joining us. If this is the first time, take a look at what the map looks so far. This is the yellow is too close to call. The blue is for President Clinton, and there is as yet no red up for Senator Dole. Now at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the polls have closed in 16 states and the District of Columbia. 202 more electoral votes are in play here at the moment, so ABC News is going to make some projections. Take a look as we go along. While we were away, by the way, we did project that Kentucky, which neither candidate could take for granted, has in fact, with its 8 electoral votes, gone for Mr. Clinton. Texas, the third biggest electoral prize in the country, 32 electoral votes we project is going to go to Mr. Dole. Bill Clinton was convinced he could win. He has not, by our projection. Texas for Dole. Pennsylvania, the fifth biggest electoral prize, with 23 electoral votes we project will go to Mr. Clinton. The Dole campaign had gone well for a while, but then substantially tailed off. In Illinois, the state to which President Clinton has strong emotional attachments, it's his wife's home state, 22 electoral votes. ABC News projects that Clinton has won in Illinois. ABC projects that Mr. Clinton has won in the state of Michigan, where the popular Republican Governor John Engler was not able to help Bob Dole, who trailed in the polls throughout the campaign. We also project that New Jersey, with its 15 electoral votes, which early in the battleground, Mr. Dole thought he could win, but then he pulled his resources out late, is now a projection by us for President Clinton. Massachusetts, another consistently Democratic state, we project will go for Mr. Clinton with its 12 electoral votes. Tennessee, Vice President Al Gore's home state, very highly contested state in 1996. Mr. Dole paid 10 visits to the state, Mr. Clinton 7. We project it is going to go to the Democrats and to Mr. Clinton, or more pertinently to Mr. Clinton and Mr. Gore. Missouri, a bellwether state, voting for every presidential winner but one, President Eisenhower, 1956. In the 20th century, we project that its 11 electoral votes will go to Mr. Clinton. Maryland, one of the more democratic states, most democratic states, in fact, 10 electoral votes we project will go for Mr. Clinton. And Connecticut, with among the most expensive media markets in the country, where Mr. Dole was forced to give up in the last 2 weeks because of a lack of money, Mr. Clinton, we project, will win it, as he did in 1992. And Oklahoma, traditionally Republican state, just north of Texas there, we project will go to Senator Dole, and Mississippi, as of now, is too close to call. However, in his home state of Kansas, Mr. Dole, we project, is the winner in Kansas. And Maine, go all the way back up to the northeast, fill it in blue. That was Ross Perot's best state in 1992. He got 30% of the vote and beat George Bush. This year, we project it is going to go to Bill Clinton. And it only has 3 electoral votes. Delaware doesn't always get much attention in presidential elections. Mr. Dole did visit the state. We project it is going to go for Mr. Clinton. Delaware always tends, at least, to vote with the winner. And the District of Columbia, the most reliable 3 electoral votes in the nation, we project are going to go to Mr. Clinton. In the South, which earlier in the evening there have been some too close to calls, and you can still see them on this giant board, we still say that Alabama, one of the most reliable Republican states at the presidential level, at least, is still too close to call. Beg your pardon, even as I speak, we are going to change that projection and project that Alabama is going to go to Bob Dole, so it remains one of the most reliable Republican states in presidential politics. And take a look now at the electoral vote tally overall. That's the way the country looks at the moment. Red for Senator Dole, blue for Mr. Clinton, yellow too close to call. 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. Mr. Clinton has 206, and Senator Dole has 55. Which takes us to the Senate and ABC's Sam Donaldson. Sam.
Peter, we have a lot of projections to make. Now, these are ABC News projections based on key precincts and based on exit polling, not on the raw data. Let's go first to Texas, where we project that Senator Phil Gramm has retained his seat against Victor Morales. He didn't get to be the Republican nominee for the presidency, but he gets to be in the Senate again. In Illinois, Democrat Dick Durbin has retained the seat for the Democrats. Paul Simon retired as the senator from Illinois, Durbin over Al Salvi. In Michigan, incumbent Senator Carl Levin has retained that seat for the Democrats, beating Ronna Romney, famous name in Michigan, but not this year. In New Jersey, hot race, and ABC News projects that Bob Torricelli has retained the seats for the Democrats. This was Bill Bradley's seat. He retired from the Senate, beating Dick Zimmer. In Massachusetts, we believe that John Kerry, the incumbent senator, will be returned to the Senate, beating a very popular William Weld, the governor. A lot of people saying, according to what they told us, that they wanted Weld to remain governor and Kerry to remain in the Senate, and we think he will. In Tennessee, the lawyer-actor turned politician Fred Thompson, who won 2 years of Al Gore's term 2 years ago, has won a full Senate seat, we believe, beating Republican Democrat Houston Gordon. In Oklahoma, we think Republican Jim Inhofe, the incumbent, has retained his seat, beating Jim Boren, whose uncle was a very popular Democratic senator a few years ago. He's now president of the university there. In Kansas, there are 2 seats up, and in the seat that Nancy Kassebaum is vacating, she's retiring, we believe that Pat Roberts, who's presently in the House of Representatives, is going to move to the Senate, retaining the seats for the Republican, beating Sally Thompson, the Democrat. The other Kansas seat, which is the remaining 2 years of Bob Dole's unexpired term, we think it's just too close to call at this time. Sam Brownback in the House versus Jill Docking, too close to call. In Maine, an important race, a toss-up, and we think it's too close to call, with Susan Collins trying to retain the seat for the Republicans. Bill Cohen is retiring over a former governor, Democrat Joe Brennan, too close to call. In Delaware, we think that the Democratic incumbent Joe Biden has won his 5th term in the Senate, beating Republican Ray Clatworthy. And in North Carolina, ABC News projects Senator Jesse Helms is reelected to another term in the Senate, once again, as he did in 1990, defeating Harvey Gantt. And those are the ones here. I think in Georgia, we also have a projection, if it's going to come up, and there it is, Democratic contender Max Cleland, the former veteran administrator. He only has one arm for the Vietnam War. He lost an arm and 2 legs. Will be in the United States Senate, defeating Guy Milner, the Republican contender. So this means, Peter, when you go through all of this, and you remember that we projected that Republican Senator Bob Smith had lost in New Hampshire, a pickup of 1 Democratic seat so far in the United States Senate.
As we always do on election night, we go through these projections in a pretty big hurry to get on the record and tell everybody, you know, so forth. But there are a couple of very interesting ones in there. Let's go with the most recent one in Georgia, Max Cleland, who ran against Guy Milner, a very rich businessman. That was a very tough race, wasn't it?
Well, Guy Milner ran for the governorship and lost 2 years ago, but Max Cleland was Jimmy Carter's veteran administrator. As I say, he's in a wheelchair. He's a veteran from the Vietnam War, and a lot of people, if they'd lost an arm and 2 legs, would just have folded up, but not Max Cleland. He was way ahead in this race, but I'll say that Guy Milner closed the gap. We don't have the percentage yet, but we are projecting that Cleland will be in the Senate.
And give us just one more note, if you will, on the race that got an awful lot of national attention, which was the Kerry-Weld race in Massachusetts.
Well, that was kind of a toss-up. It was a gentleman's race until the very end, and then Governor Weld began running some negative ads on John Kerry. John Kerry has been an effective Democratic senator. He, too, was a Vietnam War hero. But Weld is a very popular Republican governor. He's out of step with his party. He's for abortion rights for women and all of that. But in the end, it came down to Kerry retaining the seat. Now, we have another projection for Mississippi, and incumbent Thad Cochran has easily won re-election, we believe, to retain that Republican seat in Mississippi.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. And while you mentioned Mississippi, we have, as our second political guest of the evening, Senator Trent Lott of Mississippi, who has just joined us, a real power in the Congress, in the last Congress, certainly, the 104th Congress. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Peter.
Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Obvious question, I guess. What do you think, A, of the results so far, and what do you make of what's going on in the South?
Well, it's a long way to go before we know what the final results are going to be. I think we are going to pick up seats in the South. I look for us to pick up a net gain of 2 or 3 probably in the South. And some other races around the country where we look very good, including Nebraska, where I think Chuck Hagel is running very strong for that open seat of Senator Exum. So I think the prospects are very good of us holding a majority in the Senate, and we're hopeful we're going to pick up 1 or 2.
Now, it doesn't look very good for Senator Dole at this point, and so I would say that and then ask you if you're surprised by anything this evening.
Well, I'm disappointed. I thought maybe the marathon man, Bob Dole, could really close the gap, and I think he did some. But it's awfully tough when you're running against an incumbent president, and especially when you got one that has taken our language, our agenda, and started talking about, you know, how he's for a balanced budget and he's even for tax cuts. And so a lot of what he was saying, I hope he's sincere about it. If he is, we'll be able to work together and get some things done for the American people in the next couple of years.
With only 260 electoral votes decided by our projection now, I don't want to get too far down the road, but did Senator Dole make a mistake or not by leaving the Senate to campaign?
Oh, I don't know. You can always look back and wonder if he did the right thing or not. I think he did the right thing. He was comfortable with it. I think he needed to get out in the country and get a feel for the pulse of the people, so I think he did the right thing. And the Senate was getting completely balled up because he wanted to do some good things for the country. The Democrats just wouldn't let him, and it was not helping, and so he decided he would go on out there. I thought it was a courageous thing for him to do.
Now, you're on the record as saying that if the Republicans retain the House and the Senate tonight, you're going to make life pretty difficult for President Clinton in the next 4 years. You want to bring us up to speed on where you are tonight?
I didn't say that, Peter. What I said is, look, we have a responsibility to have some hearings and take a look at what has happened in this election. There appear to be some abuses and some corruption we need to find out about. But the focus of our effort in the Senate is going to be on the people's agenda. The American people voted for us to get some things done for them. We'll continue to work towards smaller, smarter federal government with less of a tax burden. And that's going to be our focus. Now, we will do our responsibility on the questions of abuses of campaign laws, but that's not going to be our principal objective.
Okay, Senator, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Okay.
So, Mississippi delegation from the Senate goes back to Congress as it was constituted in the 104th Congress, Senator Lott and Senator Cochran. We'll be back to continue our coverage in just a moment.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back to our coverage of Election 96. We're sort of awash in projections here at the moment at various levels. And perhaps in a second you take a look at the board, but a couple of governor's races, which we are now able to project. In Tennessee, we project that the incumbent Governor Thomas Carper, running for a second term, has been reelected to a second term. They're running for a higher office, those guys are at the moment. And Missouri, we project that the incumbent Governor Mel Carnahan, who is seeking a second term, he was elected in 1992 as 60% of the vote, has been reelected the second term. Now, while you take a look at our great big board up there, I want to introduce you to another member of our political staff here, who we argue around here is another very good reason to watch our coverage this evening. But very briefly now, if you look at the presidential board up there, President Clinton now has Florida, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Vermont, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Pennsylvania, Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Tennessee. Very tight fight in Tennessee. The Republicans were looking to embarrass Al Gore in Tennessee as much as anybody else. Maryland, Missouri, Connecticut, Maine, Delaware, and the District of Columbia, of course. Alabama goes to Senator Dole, as does Oklahoma and Kansas, and Texas. Big prize, Texas, which Mr. Clinton thought he could embarrass Mr. Dole, goes to Senator Dole. I'd like you to meet Gina Smith, who is in charge of ABC's World Politics Now on the Internet. Gina, tell me very briefly how people can participate in this tonight, because they can more than at any other time in the past, can't they?
Very exciting. Now, viewers can join us, actually. They can share their commentary with us as the events progress, either by joining us on our worldwide website, which is www.politicsnow.com, or on America Online. And they can send us their comments, and we can share them with you.
Now, I'm looking at some notes you gave me earlier today, and you say you can get viewer feedback as quickly as we want. For example, here's some right here.
We have one right here. We've been talking to people about why they voted like they did today. This message here comes from a Lawrence Kramer over the web from our site.
Do we know where he is coming from?
He did not give us his town or his state,
okay.
Unfortunately. And it's always up to them. They can be as anonymous as they'd like to be. He says, Bill and Hillary Clinton embody everything that is wrong with my generation, a moral compass borrowed from Robin Hood, no sense of shame, and a derisive attitude toward duty. Another one comes from who he says he's an older viewer, and he says, when I punched Clinton's name on the ballot this morning, I walked in the shoes of my father. He cast his first vote for Al Smith, voted 4 times for FDR, and felt he made a real difference when he voted for JFK. I fear Clinton may be more of a Grover Cleveland than a Harry Truman. but he is the heir of a
That's
glorious
amazing.
tradition.
You can also give us some issues later on this evening, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Gina Smith, welcome to our political team. It's
Thank
really
you.
nice to have you. Gina appears on Good Morning America. Koki, you have something on the House.
Well, finally, Peter, here you are projecting away in state after state
I
for
can
the
hardly
Senate and
keep
the
up.
President. And we finally have one measly House race that's a close race that we can call, which is one of those endangered Republican freshmen. Ed Whitfield in Kentucky has beaten his Democratic opponent, Dennis Nell. Now, that's important, even though it's only one, because it is one of the ones that the Republicans were very nervous about and felt if they had lost it, along with a few others, that they would be in very bad shape. They have won it. And it shows you that I think what we're likely to see is a long night of very even divisions. For instance, we've already called the Senate race in North Carolina for Jesse Helms, the Republican. But we have some House races in North Carolina, and these numbers now, the 2nd District, these numbers are much too early to believe. They're just a couple of precincts reporting, but this is a freshman Republican who is very much endangered, Mr. Funderburk in North Carolina. So maybe you'll see a Democrat winning there. And here again, in the 4th District in North Carolina, this is, again, these numbers are too early, but this is a rematch of David Price against Fred Heineman. Heineman defeated Price 2 years ago. Now Price might be defeating Heineman. So people could be voting Democrat for president, Republican for Senate, coming back voting Democratic for the House of Representatives.
What I'm incredibly struck about when doing my homework for the House, and we have to be brief about this at the moment, is how it was a liberal extremist versus a conservative extremist in one race after the other.
And what people wanted in each case was moderate, and each candidate tried to show the other guy was the extremist while he was the moderate. The truth is there's a good many extremists out there.
Going into tonight, did you think that the House was really going to be as close as it appears to be turning out to be? Not as close, perhaps as slow.
I have thought that the House would be very, very close going into tonight, that the Democrats were likely to pick up some seats, but that they were already close and likely to get closer.
Okay, thanks very much, Koki. We're going to cut away again now so that you across the country can rely on your local stations to get a better feel of what's going on in your neighborhood. Subscribing to what the late Speaker Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. And then I hope you'll come back and join us, and we'll begin to try to put some of these Senate and presidential victories in various states in some kind of broader context. Thank you for joining us. Hope you'll stay with us.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 votes will continue in a moment. This is ABC News live continuing coverage of the 96 votes. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to our political coverage. It is 8:30 p.m. in the East. The polls have now closed in one more state, and it won't be long before we'll give you a good wrap-up on everything that we have projected so far. But now the polls have closed in the state of Arkansas. With its 6 electoral votes, and ABC News projects that Arkansas is going to go to President Clinton, which will come as a great relief to him, undoubtedly. We had earlier projected Indiana as going to Senator Dole, voted Republican in the last 7 elections, should come as no surprise. By the way, Mr. Clinton's home state of Arkansas is the only state that he won in 1992 with more than 50% of the vote. And one of the questions tonight will be, as he continues to pile up electoral votes, he now has 212, as to whether or not he's going to reach that, plateau of 50% of the vote, because that is going to be the great question about the Clinton mandate if, as everybody now expects, it turns out he wins. Now, I want to go to our data port here because there are still some races which are too close to call. Let me go first to Georgia and show you the presidential race in Georgia at the moment. Only 8% of the precincts reporting, by the way. The Democrats held the Senate seat in Georgia, but the presidential race is too close to call, as it is in Virginia. Also too close to call, but 23% of the precincts reporting there. Senator Dole has a slight edge, doesn't mean much at this time of the evening. North Carolina, where we've already called the Senate race for the Republican Senator Helms, we now see 12% of the precincts reporting. Senator Dole a significant lead there, but again, it doesn't mean too much. South Carolina in the presidential race, 16% of the precincts reporting still too close to call. What else have I got there? That's all I have. Speaking of the South, by the way, a little while ago, I incorrectly said that Governor Tom Carper of Tennessee had been reelected. My profound apologies. He's the governor of Delaware, and he's been reelected, not of Tennessee. And one small note about another governor. We learned tonight that Governor Kirk Fordice of Mississippi was injured in a traffic accident this evening, is being treated at the hospital. We do not yet know how well or how well he is or how badly he has been hurt. We'll check in, let you know, think of him, and wish him obviously our best. A source from the Clinton camp tonight, someone who's spoken with the president this evening, says he is very satisfied that he changed his schedule in the last several days to campaign for some senatorial candidates, most notably Massachusetts and New Hampshire, where the Democrats, John Kerry won in New Hampshire, Congressman Sweat won in New Hampshire, unseating the incumbent Republican senator there, and in New Jersey, where ABC News has projected that Torricelli, the Democrat, is the winner there. And that's going to take us right to Lynn Sherr, who covers our exit polls. That's our projection in New Jersey, that Torricelli will beat Dick Zimmer, the Republicans. This is one of the meanest, nastiest, most expensive, once most expensive, put a sort of unattractive adjective on it, and that's what it looked like in New Jersey. We perhaps here in New York noticed it more than you did, but it certainly was not something to be proud of in either candidate's case. At any rate, how do they feel about that race? Let's go to ABC's Lynn Sherr, who looks at the exit polls. Lynn?
Peter, what we found across the country and in New Jersey is that voters, by a slight majority, don't like what the Republican Congress has been doing. By a larger majority, they disapprove of the way Newt Gingrich has been behaving. Now, take that to New Jersey. Of those who said they disapprove of the Republican Congress, here's why, one of the reasons why Bob Torricelli won. 84% voted for Torricelli, only 14% for the GOP Congressman Dick Zimmer. So disapproval of the Republican Congress. One more point we want to make for you. There's great optimism in this country right now. We asked voters whether they thought the country was going in the right direction or on the wrong track. Well, 2 years ago, when that Republican Congress got in, by the way, only 39% thought the country was going in the right direction. Today, more than half, 53% say we're going in the right direction. Peter?
Okay, Lynn, thank you very much. On the subject of going in the right direction, Jeff Greenfield and I have often talked about the law of unintended consequences. Congress and the presidency tonight compared to '94, quite a change.
No, we're talking so much about the House and the Senate, and it just occurred to me, you know, Bill Clinton is heading toward 270 tonight. The best thing that happened to Bill Clinton in the last 2 years happened 2 years ago tonight when he lost the Congress. The takeover of the Congress by the Republicans and the conservative revolutionaries so scared the liberals, they absolutely deigned to run a primary against him. Most Democratic presidents face a primary. It gave Clinton running room to get to the center without alienating his left. And I don't know if they'll ever say that publicly, but they have said it to some of us privately. Thank God the Republicans won the Congress 2 years ago. It helped re-elect Bill Clinton tonight, if that's where we're heading.
Okay, Jeff, thank you very much. I wonder whether or not Congressman Dick Armey of Texas, the 26th district specifically, is listening. He's our third political guest to join us this evening. Congressman, thank you, for joining us. Did you hear what Jeff Greenfield said a moment ago?
Well, yes, I did. And I tell you, Peter, I'm having the most fun watching you guys today. We always knew the Democrats had the benefit of the doubt in the press, but tonight they're getting the benefit of the speculation. And I'm getting the biggest kick out of watching this. When we have a Republican that's projected to be ahead by 1.8% of the precincts reporting, then the Democrats got a chance to beat him. When we have a Democrat that's ahead, then it's a done deal. I think the whole business of speculating on exit polls and making projections based on 1% of the vote is what causes people to have to go back and revise their projections and put Alabama back in a different column 5 or 6 minutes later.
Okay, Congressman, lecture certainly noted. Now, what do you think of what's happening in your neighborhood tonight?
Well, Texas is doing exactly what we predicted. Phil Gramm has won. Bob Dole's winning here. Texas will have a gain in House seats. And the rest of Texas, I'm sure the state offices are going well, too. I'm very proud of Texas. We are one state that is clearly going to wake up tomorrow without a severe case of buyer's remorse.
Do you have any doubt about how the evening will turn out in terms of the House and the Senate and the presidency?
Well, we have so little results we have in yet on the House that I'm still holding fast to my prediction that the House Republican majority will gain seats. The Senate is still kind of nip and tuck, but so far there's no reason to vacate my projection that we will hold the Senate. And at this point, even I am considering the possibility that maybe Bill Clinton might get reelected.
And let me ask you this. I was looking at the Almanac of American Politics just a moment in anticipation of talking to you and being reminded that back in 1994 when you were debating the crime bill, you said of President Clinton he just wasn't that important to the Republican Congress. Is that likely to change now, do you think?
Well, it seems to me that President Clinton needs to be more active and more assertive and more involved in the process of making legislation. If the president were to actually act out the part of an active president taking initiative along the lines on which he campaigns, then I think he can work in partnership with a Republican Congress. The president, I don't think, can afford this second term if he wants to have a place in history that's at all secure. And if he's reelected, he'll have to actually write some legislation and send it up to the Hill and participate more in the process of trying to enact legislation. We saw a little bit of that ability late in this past year when he was out campaigning and Leon Panetta got more involved in the legislative process. So it isn't impossible that we can have an assertive legislating activity from the White House. We haven't seen much of that, but certainly that is within the realm of possibility if the president wanted to become more involved in actually making law.
Congressman, thank you very much. Congressman Dick Armey from Texas, one of the brightest and often the most outspoken members of the Congress. As to how things are going in the House at the moment, Cokie Roberts.
Well, Congressman Armey is the majority leader, and from his perspective, the House is obviously the most important thing. We have running totals that of people who were not in very tough races, and they have been reelected in some states. So out of 198 current Democrats, we have now 94 new Democrats. Out of 236 current Republicans, we now have 115 new Republicans and a loss of 1 Democrat in our running total so far tonight. So it's a long night ahead on the House. Mr. Armey will have to wait.
Okay, Cokie, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Armey, talking about influence, and we're going to come back in a minute and talk about the various forces in the country which have tried to exert their influence in this particular election campaign, not least of which the enormously expensive campaign put on by organized labor. We'll be right back.
ABC News coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back to our political coverage. You want to go to Little Rock right now and check in with the Clinton campaign. ABC's Britt Hume, the White House correspondent's down there. Britt, what's he been doing so far this evening?
Peter, it will astonish you, I'm sure, as it did me to learn that when the Florida call was made by us, that Mr. Clinton was sleeping, according to his staff, and was awakened by one of his political aides and was said to be understandably jubilant. So the president has been sitting there after taking notes and working the telephone, and is said to have made a congratulatory phone call to Dick Swett, the Democrat who won that seat in New Hampshire. Peter?
Britt, how does it compare down there tonight to 4 years ago?
Well, 4 years ago, we didn't have anything like as beautiful a night here. Accounts of that night given to me indicated that it was a cold and raw night. The greater sense of apprehension there has been today. There's been a carnival atmosphere in this city today. No one in any doubt of the outcome all day at any time. And the atmosphere can only be described as festive.
Tell me what we're looking at the moment.
Well, this is the old State House, Peter, a very picturesque building that sits amid a lot of modern buildings in the heart of downtown Little Rock. This is where the president first announced he was running 4 or 5 years ago. This is where he celebrated on this night 4 years ago, and it is a matter of custom now that this is the platform to which he will come later tonight to make his statement. There's a whole long card of entertainment, details of which I won't even go into, that will precede him.
Okay, Britt, thanks very much. Get back to you a little later on. ABC's Sam Donaldson wants to make a projection on the Senate. Sam.
Well, Peter, we'd already projected one of the Kansas races, the one that Nancy Kassebaum gave up that seat, a Republican. We said Pat Roberts had won that one, according to our exit polls and our key precincts. We are ready now to project the other Kansas race. This is the 2 years of Bob Dole's unexpired term, and we believe Republican Sam Brownback, who has been a member of the House of Representatives, has won it and defeated Jill Docking. Looking at some races that are too close to call, in Arkansas, the president may have swept his state, But Tim Hutchinson, a Republican, is in a close race with Winston Bryant, the Democrat. Now, that is David Pryor's seat, a Democratic seat, and Bryant has to hold on to it if the Democrats are going to make real gains in the Senate. In Maine, another very close race, too close to call. Susan Collins trying to retain the seat for the Republicans. Bill Cohen gave it up. He retired against Joe Brennan, a former Democratic governor. And in Virginia, this may turn out to be the Senate race of the evening. John Warner versus Mark Warner, too close to call. John Warner is a Republican who went against his party, against Oliver North when North was running for the Senate. He won the nomination. It was a crossover state. Democrats could vote in that primary. But let's face it, the Democrats are voting for Mark Warner, apparently in Virginia tonight, and it's just too close to call.
Well, a couple things to get you to elaborate here, Sam. First of all, in Virginia, in the polls in the closing day, Senator Warner was way ahead of the other Warner, wasn't he?
Well, the polls were closing, but Warner still had a lead. Two things happened in that campaign. Mark Warner spent a lot of money. He's worth about $100 million, and he threw a lot into it. Here's an interesting statistic for you. Everybody jumped on Huffington in California when he spent a lot of money on a losing race. He spent about $2.05 per voter in California. Mark Warner has spent about $2.50 per voter in Virginia. And secondly, about 3.5 years ago, John Warner's ad agency put out an ad in which they had lifted Mark Warner's head and imposed it on Chuck Robb's body. Now, Chuck Robb is the incumbent Democratic senator, not up for election. Right. And Robb was shaking hands at the moment in the picture with Douglas Wilder, a former governor of Virginia, an African-American. Well, John Warner said he had nothing to do with it. He fired his ad agency, but it gave Mark Warner an opening, left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
And the other thing, which would be quite a change, at least in ideological terms, is the projection you made for Brownback in Kansas. Much more conservative than the Republicans that Kansas usually send to Washington, right?
Well, yes, much more if you count the old Bob Dole versus the sort of new Bob Dole who came this year. Certainly much more conservative than Nancy Kassebaum, but that was the other seat. But what we have so far in the Senate is a pickup of 1 for the Democrats. In New Hampshire, we project that Bob Smith, the incumbent Republican senator, has lost that race to Dick Swett. But so far, what's happened is that the other Republicans, Jesse Helms in North Carolina, who had to hold their seats, have, and the other Democrats, John Kerry in Massachusetts, Max Cleland holding a Democratic seat in Georgia, have. So, I mean, this Senate race to see who organizes the Senate could really go down to the wire, certainly into the western states.
Sam, thanks so much. You've introduced the subject of money, which brings me back to David Brinkley. David, we've been sort of muttering about the influence of money this year in politics. The AFL-CIO has made an extraordinary bid to get itself back in the saddle this year.
It's an interesting little piece of history. The early days of the unions, they said, what we want the bread and roses too. We want essentials and we want luxury. Now they say, what do you want? They say, more. That's all, that's their answer. So that's what they're after now. They have not been satisfied with what they've been getting from government recently. So they have called on their members, forced them in fact, to contribute to a political fund, and they got up $35 million, which they have spent on this present campaign. And it has produced some victories for them. They have done very well with it. The politicians, of course, hate it. They don't like it, but there it is.
It's very interesting. When Dave and I were chatting here a moment ago, and I asked if anybody else wanted to play on this, hands went up all over the room. Koki, David mentions the $35 million that the AFL-CIO spent. In fact, that may be well understating the money they put in.
It could be well understating the money because they spent a certain amount of money on television advertising, and in some districts, Peter, really went to spend more than there were people in the district on television advertising. And then we don't have a clue how much they spent, as they say, on the ground, and get out the vote, voter guides, all of that in the last few days. But we've already called one race where Labor spent a whole lot of money in Kentucky, and that Republican won anyway. We have a couple of others where Labor has spent a great deal of money. The 6th District of Ohio, where Frank Cremines is in a rematch with Ted Strickland. Now, it's still too early to call that race, but Cremines looks like he's running ahead there. Again, in Georgia, now here's one where it's really much too close to call, but the incumbent, Charlie Norwood, is in a tight race with David Bell. And then in New Hampshire, again, Labor just spent a ton of money in this race, and Bass is the incumbent who Labor targeted, running against against Deborah Arneson. And again, he looks like he might be pulling it out, though it's too early to tell. So even though they spent that much money, they could find themselves in the districts where they spent it going down. And that could put them in a worse bind than they were in going into this election.
Well, let me ask Jeff Greenfield a question, too, because, Jeff, I can't remember going anywhere this year where the AFL-CIO wasn't the biggest organizational factor, other than the Republican National Senatorial Committee, which poured in tons of money.
Yes, in fact, I was out in Santa Barbara weeks ago, and the AFL-CIO was dumping a tremendous amount of money into a race we'll hear about later from Koki, the Santa Barbara race between Andrea Seastrand and Walter Capps. In fact, when we talk about elections, Peter, your comments remind me that one of the most important elections we haven't mentioned was the election of John Sweeney as president of the AFL-CIO. More radical, or certainly more liberal than the old leadership, and much more determined to get labor back onto the political playing field, and he has done it with money.
We'll try very hard before the evening is out to give you some sense of how well or how badly the AFL-CIO and some of the other major money players this season did in terms of actual races. I'm not sure to be able to do that for several hours. But Sam, I know you have a projection in the Senate.
Yes, it's important. In Alabama, we project that Jeff Sessions, the Republican Attorney General, has won the Senate seat. That would be a turnover because it was Hal Heflin, the Democrats' retiring seat. That would mean if Bob Smith is lost in New Hampshire, a Republican, and there's a pickup by a Republican in Alabama. But once again, at this point in the evening, the Senate is exactly what it is now, 53-43 Republican, Peter.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. This is another classic example. We've seen it in every part of the country this year, in the Senate races and in the House races, where Sessions tried to paint his opponent Bedford as a liberal, and Bedford tried to paint Sessions as an extremist. One was allied with Newt Gingrich when the other got allied with Teddy Kennedy, the senator from Massachusetts. It went back and forth in every race in the country, this extremist liberal, extremist conservative. Hope you'll join us when we come back to continue our coverage of Politics 96 in just a minute.
The voting is just about over in 12 more states. Their polls close at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Will they put Clinton over the top? The answer when the 96 vote continues. This is the 96 vote. Once again from ABC News World Headquarters in New York, Peter Jennings.
Good evening. Welcome back, I hope, to our political coverage of Election 96. Welcome if you're joining us for the first time. If you take a look at the map of the country up there, you can see, at least in color terms, what it looks like up until now. It is now 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and we are going to make some projections. In New York, never a battleground in this election. The Clinton state, one of his best in '92. He wins it again in 1996. In Wisconsin, we project that Mr. Clinton is going to win Wisconsin. This is where the governor of Wisconsin, Tommy Thompson, criticized Mr. Dole's campaign for not listening to people in the state. We project that Minnesota, with its 10 electoral votes, is going to go to Mr. Clinton, home of Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, one of the states where it's still okay to be called a liberal. New Mexico, with its 5 electoral votes, we project goes to Mr. Clinton, except, by the way, for 1976. New Mexico has voted with the winner in every presidential election since statehood in 1912. Rhode Island, way over there in the corner on the eastern side, one of the most democratic states in the presidential politics, stays that way. And take a look at the electoral vote board. 270 needed to win. ABC News now projects that Mr. Clinton will be re-elected as of now, at this point, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. He has, by our calculation, 275 electoral votes, and Mr. Dole has 89. That is Little Rock, Arkansas, outside the old State House, where we talked to our White House correspondent, Britt Hume, a little while ago. I'm not sure they've heard the projections, but they have followed the race very closely. And Britt, this will come as no surprise, I suspect, to the Clintons. I'm not sure it comes as a great surprise to many people in the country.
It came as very good news indeed to this large crowd assembled here when it went up on this tally board across the way from me. There was a tremendous roar of approval. Everyone, of course, is waiting ultimately to hear the president speak, but he is not expected to come here until after California closes, and so we have to wait a bit for him here. But the word has reached this crowd, a happy crowd indeed.
Okay, thank you very much, Britt, and we're very aware at this point that what ABC's Jeff Greenfield sometimes calls the sagebrush rebellion begins, and people in the West think there is no longer any reason to participate today. I think any sensible person would argue that is not the case. There's an enormous amount happening in California, particularly some of the important propositions there, not to mention all of the local races. That's true throughout the Pacific and the Mountain Time Zone. We'll get to a lot of that in a minute. But I want to go on calling the presidential race as we see it as of now in Wyoming at 9 o'clock. The polls have now closed there, and we project that Wyoming, pretty well always safely Republican, goes for Senator Dole. He didn't even visit there in 1996. He was that confident. We also project now that North Carolina, which was too close for a long period of time, Elizabeth Dole's home state, has gone to Senator Dole. And Nebraska, which the Almanac of American Politics says has voted more Republican in presidential elections than any other state, has hewed to its course, and we project goes now for Senator Dole. There are still some races, you can see on that big map there, which are too close to call. Louisiana, we still say, is too close to call. Arizona is too close to call. Colorado is too close to call. North Dakota is too close to call. And South Dakota, too close to call. And I think, Sam, before we go on to talk about propositions and the like, you have some Senate calls.
I do, Peter. We have some more Senate races to call and look at, and it doesn't do anything to clarify the makeup of the Senate at this point. Let's start, however, with Paul Wellstone in Minnesota. The incumbent senator, we believe, has won re-election. His opponent, Rudy Boschwitz, the former senator, said that Paul Wellstone was embarrassingly liberal. And Wellstone said, yes, I'm a liberal, and apparently from Minnesota, they said that's all right with us. In New Mexico, we project that Pete Domenici, the Republican incumbent, will win a 5th term in the United States Senate. In Rhode Island, Jack Reed, the Democrat, has held on to Claiborne Pell's seat. Claiborne Pell is retiring, another Democrat, has defeated Nancy Mayer. In Wyoming, we believe that Mike Enzi, the Republican state senator, will soon be a United States senator, having defeated Kathy Carpenter, according to our projections, the Democrat. Now, in Virginia, we now project that John Warner, the Republican incumbent, has defeated Mark Warner and retains the seat for the Republicans. Very tight race, but we think that John Warner will win re-election. In Louisiana, now this is too close to call. It's very important for the makeup of the Senate. Mary Landrieu is trying to hold on to Bennett Johnston's, he's retiring, Democratic seat. But Woody Jenkins, the Republican, has come on strong in recent days, and we think it's too close to call. In Colorado, too close to call between Wayne Allard, the Republican trying to hold on to the Republican seat being vacated by Senator Hank Brown. He's defeating Tom Strickland, perhaps. We don't know. It's too close to call in Colorado. In Nebraska, here's a tight race. The popular governor, Ben Nelson, against Chuck Hagel. It's too close to call at this time. Nelson's the Democrat and Hagel's the Republican. In South Dakota, embattled Larry Pressler, a Republican incumbent that many people think was the most endangered Republican incumbent, is fighting it out with Tim Johnson, Democratic congressman, and it is too close to call at this time. So far, Peter, the recap is the Republicans have lost a seat in New Hampshire, we believe, and they have picked up a seat in Alabama, so it's still 53-47 at this hour.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. Let's go to the House briefly. Cokie Roberts.
Well, we have a couple of interesting things to talk about here, Peter. One is an open seat in Indiana. Republicans hope to pick it up. It was a Democratic seat. The Democrats have held it. But what's really important about it, it's a Democratic woman, Julia Carson. She ran against a Republican woman. But it's Indianapolis. It's a seat that is only about a 30% black vote, and it is a black Democrat who has won there, somewhat giving the lie to the notion that you have to have majority black, specially drawn district for a black representative to be elected. Here is a white district electing a black. And those Republican freshmen that we have talked so much about for the last few days, we can talk about a couple of them. In New Jersey, the 2nd District, Lo Biondo, a freshman the Democrats were hoping to pick off. Ruth Katz, a wealthy businesswoman, spent a lot of her own money. Lo Biondo has won that race. And in Oklahoma, where the labor movement spent a great deal of money against Tom Coburn, he has won against the state speaker, Glenn Johnson. So let's look at how the freshman Republicans are doing so far in this election. We have, out of 71 Republican freshmen who are up for re-election, 29 of them have won so far. none of them has lost. Of the Democrats, 17 freshmen up, 9 have won so far, 1 appears to be losing. So those Republican freshmen, at least so far, are doing pretty well.
Well, I'm going to say that's the most, in some ways, the most important thing I've heard you say in a long time. No offense intended.
Thanks a
I
lot.
apologize. Well, because we were talking about the Republican freshmen, which has been the big target. There's 71 of them are candidates and 29 have won, and none of them have lost.
Well, but 29, some of them were not in terrible trouble. But now we've got 3 of them who were in trouble we've called that have won. And we've got a Democrat who appears to have lost, and we have them doing better than the Democrats thought they would. Anyway, they thought they were going to do this well.
And would you also agree that doing somewhat better than conventional wisdom said they would do?
Well, then some conventional wisdom.
Thank you very much.
I
know
would
with
like to say
apologies.
that I would not. I was never on that team.
With apologies to Dick Armey.
You.
Yes, I quite agree. Okay, now we're very mindful, I promise you, that of this debate that goes on in the West about having projected the president as having gained the 270 electoral votes. We'll come back in a minute and talk about all of the other politics going on out West. But remember, in California particularly, you've got several very important initiatives, including Proposition 209, which we've just been looking at here, which is the California Civil Rights Initiative, which is perhaps certainly among the most important contentious propositions on the ballot anywhere in the country today. So there is every reason, if you have not voted in the Pacific time zone, to do so. And just a reminder that in Colorado, the polls, mind you, have closed in Colorado. On the presidential level, it is too close to call. So is Arizona, so is Louisiana, and so are the 2 Dakotas. We'll be back in a moment to talk to the president's chief of staff.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues once again from New York. Peter Jennings.
First, a piece of news from Mississippi. We told you earlier that Governor Fortas had been injured in a traffic accident this evening. The doctors say he is suffering from a fractured ribs and a severely lacerated, possibly severed ear. His injuries do not appear to be life-threatening. Not good news, but not the worst news for Governor Fortas in Mississippi this evening. And we're joined now by another of our political guests this evening. The President's Chief of Staff is with us, Leon Panetta. Mr. Panetta, I'm embarrassed to say I don't even know where you are at the moment.
Hi, Peter.
You're in Little Rock.
I'm not quite sure where I'm at either. I think it's in Little Rock, in front of the old State House where the president will appear later this evening.
Okay, well, I apologize for not knowing. I want to ask you a personal question, first of all. You're going to stay on the job?
Well, obviously, I'm Chief of Staff and going to continue to be Chief of Staff as we work through the transition. It's no secret that at some point I'll go back to California, but right now I'm Chief of Staff of the President of the United States.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, in terms of looking at the strategy of this campaign, what went well and what has gone badly?
Well, obviously, strategy worked pretty well because the President basically kept on message to the American people about the importance of unifying together to try to deal with the issues that affect American families. I think his message on the economy, on jobs, on education, on crime, on health care, these were issues that affect American families. They recognized it, and I think the fact that Bob Dole never talked to those issues was important to the American people. I think that's the reason for the victory tonight.
As you probably know, sir, it's a little early in the evening, or at least difficult at this point of the evening, to talk about the shape of the Congress with any certainty. Except that it doesn't look as if the Democrats are going to regain control of either the House or the Senate. How difficult is that going to make life for the president?
Well, I would hope if anything comes out of this evening, it's that both parties agree to set aside the attacks, the gridlock, and the partisanship, and in a bipartisan way, regardless of what happens this evening, and it's too early to tell. But I would hope that both parties would focus on the president's themes, his message about dealing with the issues that affect families. The American people tonight made one thing clear. We're tired of attacks. We're tired of the kind of partisanship and gridlock we've seen. What we want to see are our issues dealt with. That's what they care about, and that's what they showed in this vote. And I think both parties would be smart to pay attention.
And given the history of the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch, do you think that's remotely possible?
I think if you look at the last few months of working with this Congress and our ability to get minimum wage done, our ability to get health care done in the Kennedy-Kassebaum bill, our ability to get our budget done, if you look at those issues, we did some important successes because they were willing to move towards the president's position. If they're willing to do that in this next Congress, assuming that they win a majority, I think we can serve the American people.
I do one more personal question. It's not about you, it's about the president. But we both know that he is 50 years old. He'll be 54 when his second term ends, if our projections are correct. Do you and he ever talk about that?
I think the president always looks to where he's been, and I think the key to this president is he's never forgotten his roots here in Arkansas and what he's about. He knows that the future belongs to the young people that are coming up, and it's that focus that I think keeps him on message with regards to where the American people are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Panetta, for joining us. We'll talk to you from Washington
Peter.
Next time, I suspect. Leon Panetta, the president's chief of staff, who, rumor hath it, would like to run for the governorship in California someday. At any rate, he talks about what he thinks the issues are that the president has won on. Let's go and see what the voters thought today. ABC's Lynn Shure on our exit poll. Lynn.
Peter, what really worked for the president tonight was the economy. It was cited, economy and the jobs cited as the #1 issue by most, cited as the #1 issue by a lot of voters, and of them, they all think it's doing just fine. These are people who also voted for Bill Clinton. Let's take a look. Of those who said the #1 issue was the economy, Bill Clinton got 60% of their votes. Bob Dole, only 28%. The economy working for the president. Another big thing that worked for him was the women's vote. Here comes the gender gap again. Of the people who voted for Bill Clinton, the Clinton vote, 44% of men, but 54% of women, more than half. That's a very sizable and a good gender gap for the president. Now, those are all positives. What about the negatives? There's a real big one. We asked voters whether they believe that President Clinton is honest and trustworthy. Listen to what they said. 42% said yes, the president's honest and trustworthy, but more than half, 53%, believe the president is not honest. Peter?
Thanks, Lynn. I was just actually trying to write those figures down as quickly as I can, because on the gender gap, we're talking here about a very calculated move by the president this year to campaign to women, particularly to suburban women. We sometimes confuse the gender gap as somehow thinking it's women's issues. Women's issues are men's issues when it certainly comes to economic matters. And on the honesty question, 42% thought he was honest and forthright or trustworthy, and 53% he did not. It is clear, I think, to a lot of people throughout the country, certainly many we have talked to, that they voted for the president today on the economy, and in some cases they crossed their fingers or perhaps other things when they were looking towards him in terms of character and trustworthiness. And the big question for the president tonight for many people will be whether or not there was a Clinton mandate, whether or not he gets 50% of the vote in his favor facing a Republican Congress. Now, I want to move on just a little bit here and ask Cokie Roberts again. Now, Cokie, I beg your pardon, you're on station Sam. Projection?
I do. I have a projection from Nebraska. ABC News projects on the basis of exit polls and key precincts that Chuck Hagel, a Republican, has won that seat over Ben Nelson, the popular Democratic governor. Not popular enough this time. And that is a switch. It was a seat that Senator Jim Exon, a Democrat, had held before his retirement. If the Senate were frozen at this moment, it would mean a pickup of 1 in the Senate for the Republicans. But I want to caution you, it is not frozen at this moment. I'm not quite certain, Peter, how we explain this. As I say, 2 years ago, Ben Nelson won a second term as governor with 74% of the vote. But Hagel is a very popular investment banker. He was in the then Veterans Administration under President Reagan. He held a post there. He's a wounded veteran of the Vietnam War. And he ran a lot of ads. And apparently the Democratic governor sort of took things for granted. The first rule in politics is never take anything for granted. Run scared. Ben Nelson didn't run scared enough.
Well, the Republican National Committee, I know, ran a lot of ads saying Nelson was too liberal with your money.
Well,
so
there's that.
There's that liberal word again.
Well, you saw in our projection for the presidency, Bob Dole has won Nebraska. A lot of people in Nebraska simply said they're going to vote Republican this year. Well, that's fine for Chuck Hagel. He's going to be the new Republican senator.
Okay, Sam, thank you very much. I just want to, again, talk a little bit about this business of propositions or citizens' initiatives in various parts of the country. I think we've got one card or one graphic here which shows you a little bit of an initiative overview. I think we said there are more than 90 of them in 20 states, the largest number of initiatives since 1924. 94, actually. and 1914, not 1924. But there are a number of states on term limits in 14 states. Criminal justice is on the ballot in 13 states. Hunting, hunters' rights is on the ballot in 10 states. 8 gambling, government and legal reform. This, among other things, has to do with giving people additional funds in many cases, and there are several tax questions and several social issues. And there are these 2 big ones in California yet to come, which we'll talk about. The California Civil Rights Initiative out there, and the proposition to legalize marijuana for medicinal purposes. I want to get one quick comment from ABC's Jeff Greenfield on this question of poll closings and whether or not people spoil things.
Very simply, if Dole had pulled an upset in the East, the Republicans would have been desperate for us to project that, to let the people out West know, get to the polls, we might be able to pull it off. The second point is we never know, when we talk about exit polls, who stays home. The Democrats who know they've won or the Republicans who know they've lost. I understand why the people on the West are upset. They feel disenfranchised. Every study I've seen says we don't know what the impact is.
Okay, Jeff, thanks very much. I know in the last 2 elections, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 3 of the states in the Pacific time zone, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, vote higher than the national average. California and Hawaii, in both instances, have voted at a lower than national average. So we'll see what happens tonight. We're going to cut away now to our local stations all across the country to bring you up with politics and local events, and we'll be back on the half hour. Hope you'll join us then. Parts of the country in the early stages, according to the polls, and does not appear to have taken in the exit polls. Now, we've got, by the way, speaking of incumbents and not throwing the bums out this year, here are 3 governors who are incumbents who have been re-elected tonight. Incumbent Governor Ed Schaefer, seeking a 2nd term in North Dakota, has been re-elected. Incumbent Governor Mike Leavitt in Utah has been re-elected, seeking a 2nd term. And in Montana, the incumbent governor there, Mike Roscoe, has been re-elected there. I thought I was going to go to Cokie Roberts, and I did not, so let me turn in the opposite direction here now and welcome the former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo. Mr. Cuomo, good evening. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
What sort of a president will Bill Clinton now have to be, given the Congress that he is likely to face?
I think one of the unfortunate parts about this campaign and the victory is that it doesn't give a very precise picture of what the public can expect in the 4 years ahead. What President Clinton did, and he did it superbly well in this campaign, was indicate directions without being terribly specific about them. I think what he needs to do very, very quickly, after dealing with campaign financing reform in some manner, that has to be dealt with right away, is continue with deficit reduction, because that was one of the specifics that he was strong on. He has to make education a great, great emphasis. If you look at those polls, I would be shocked. I haven't seen them, but I would be shocked if education wasn't his single best issue, better even than deficit reduction. And so he has to have deficit reduction, a priority, an emphasis. Education is my favorite. He should say that he will do for education what John Kennedy did for space, set us on the path to becoming the best educated people in world history. We are not at this moment. That's the one issue, Peter, that will deal with the 2 huge problems we have. A subsiding middle class that's working harder and not getting ahead the way it used to, and a desperate poor population that hasn't even been mentioned in this campaign of 40 million people who are being denied the chance to work. Education is the one thing that touches both those groups. And so he needs to emphasize his awareness of the problems of the middle class and the struggling middle class and the poor. Education will do that for him.
Let me ask you a political question, because a lot of his supporters, particularly his liberal supporters, went through this campaign thinking that he had vetoed welfare reform, and that he was going to fix it in the 2nd term. This Congress won't allow him to do that, will it?
I don't believe it's going to be possible. I think he meant it when he said it. He said he would try, but I think you need a Democratic Congress to do it. Even a Democratic Congress would have had difficulty turning on a dime and saying, okay, we passed it, we won the election in part on the basis of it, because his welfare reform signature was popular, not with me and not with some other people, but certainly popular overall with the American people, I think. And so it would have been difficult to do it. It could have been done perhaps with a Democratic Congress. It can't be done without a Democratic Congress. That's a tragedy.
I beg you for a short answer on this. Is he going to be able to carve a place in history in the second term? Is he going to have to accommodate too much to the Republican majority which seems to be holding in the Congress?
I think if he does the things I mentioned and one other thing, and that is a successful bipartisan commission on Social Security and Medicare, that one thing by itself will give him a legacy. If he is able to deal with the Medicare problem, which is only eight or so years away, if he is able to do something with Social Security, it's going to be tougher to do Medicare after the way we ran as Democrats. If he can do that, if he can do education, if he can continue to do deficit reduction, big tax cuts are out of the way at lost this time around, he will have a great legacy. He's already proven he's the best Democratic president and maybe the best president in history politically. No one's ever been as good politically as Bill Clinton. Now he can have a substantive legacy as well. Social Security, Medicare, education, deficit reduction, that's all he needs.
Thank you very much, Governor Cuomo, for coming. If anybody's going to hold his feet to the fire, I suspect you are. Thank you very much for taking the time. An urgent message from the Dole-Kemp campaign from Nelson Warfield, the press secretary. Due to an error, a statement from the Dole campaign was prematurely released to some news outlets this evening, including us. The fact is, Bob Dole has conceded nothing. We regret any confusion this error has caused your news organization. Poor Mr. Warfield.
I didn't see the original statement.
Well, the original statement came from Nelson Warfield, in which he said Bob Dole has fulfilled his mission as the Democratic Party. He recognizes that the defeat has occurred. He's happy that the country, by appearing to vote Republicans back into the House and to the Senate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Warfield, I think,
isn't it?
I think Mr. Warfield is probably a bit embarrassed at the moment. Yeah. We'll pick this up a little later when we come back. Okay. We'll be right back after this. Hope you'll stay with us.
ABC News coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back to our political coverage. We're going to go straight to Sam Donaldson, who's going to make a very important projection in the Senate. Right, Sam?
Yes, Peter. In the Senate, we project from the state of Arkansas that Tim Hutchinson, the Republican nominee, has become the new Republican senator from that state. And that's a switch. That's become a seat that David Pryor, the retiring Democratic senator, had held, and now the Republicans are going to hold it in the new Congress. That means at the moment the Republicans are 2 seats up on their own record. If the Senate were frozen at the moment, it would be 55 Republicans and, 45 Democrats. And on the basis of this, while that projection may not hold, we think that the Republicans will continue to control the United States Senate, Peter.
Hasn't been a Republican from Arizona this century, am I right? Republican senator from Arizona this century? Somebody help me here.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
I think it was 19...
We'll check.
30 something.
We'll check, lest I embarrass myself. But Sam, I don't think there's been a Republican senator from Arizona this century. But you do now project, do I understand you clearly, sir,
yes,
that the Republicans are going to control the Senate?
Well, even as you and Mr. Brinkley were talking, in my ear, our fine executive producer has said to me, remember way back in the beginning of the evening when we projected that Senator Bob Smith would lose in New Hampshire? Mm-hmm. He's a Republican. Mm-hmm. We are now saying, whoa, wait. It's too close to call. Now, if that's correct, I would then like to take back the fact that we're saying the Republicans will control the Senate. They may still do that.
As I understand it, Sam, you are not sure your correction is correct. Is that
Excuse
right?
me, hold it, guys. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. Excuse, everybody hold it for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see the hole we're about to dive into. Sam?
Well, first of all, I would like to get out of the hole individually. David,
yes.
We may have a problem. Not I, Kimosabe, alone.
All right, let me just tell the folks at home one thing. Early in the evening, this happens sometimes. Not very often. We're enormously proud at ABC News of the people who run our vote service and our voter analysis project, Carolyn Smith and others. But on occasion, we draw back a little. We now wish to say that the projection that Senator Smith in New Hampshire was going to lose his Senate seat is not absolutely correct. We now wish to say, Sam, that it is too close to call.
That's right. It's too close to call, and the estimable Cokie Roberts has just said to me, well, look, if Senator Smith retains his seat, why would you take back the projection that Republicans are going to retain the Senate? I thought about that a moment, and I said, she's right. If Senator Smith does retain his seat, it makes our idea that the Republicans will control the Senate and the new Congress even stronger. So I guess I'm batting 500 on this, Peter.
David, you've been putting up with these two for how long on Sundays?
With great pleasure for something like, I don't know, 20
Stay close to me, Koki, I need you.
I've loved every minute
All
of it.
right, now listen. All right, Koki, have you got some news?
Yeah,
I do.
Koki, give us
I
some
do
news.
have
We had
some
enough of
news
this.
because you remember a couple of years ago at this point where we had the remarkable news that Dan Rostenkowski had lost. Well, now the fellow who beat him, Michael Flanagan, called the Giant Killer, he has not surprisingly lost as well to Rod Blagojevich. Rostenkowski said at one point that he was on a plane with Flanagan, and he said to Flanagan, don't get too used to Congress, you're not going to be there very long, and he hasn't been. Now, that also means now we see 6 of these Republican freshmen losing. In the Pennsylvania 21st District, Phil English is losing to Ron DiNicola. In North Carolina, another freshman, David Funderburk, is losing to Bobby Etheridge. And in New Jersey, Bill Martini is losing to Bill Pascrell. So now those Republican freshmen are beginning to go down, Peter. 6 of them going, and our model of the House, unlike what we have been hearing all night that the Republicans hold it, are now showing it so close that whatever party wins will carry it by a tiny majority, but we're not ready to call the House of Representatives.
Okay, Koki, thanks very much indeed. I want to turn to our political director, Hal Bruno, who works every precinct in the country, and talk just very briefly. We'll come back to it. We've hardly mentioned Ross Perot all evening.
That's because he's not doing much. He's running under 10% in most places. He's only a shadow of himself from 4 years ago when he got 19% nationwide. New England, one of his strongest regions 4 years ago. Maine, he had 30% 4 years ago. Tonight, he's running at about 12%. In the Midwest, in Ohio, he had 21% in 1992. Tonight, he was around 6 or 7%. So he's not having much impact.
So this visitation from the Dole campaign, which gave Mr. Perot, appeared to give Mr. Perot such an opening, he got up and talked a lot about character and money in the campaign in the last several days, does not appear to have given him a big boost?
Not much at all. And also, this time, he didn't have the issue that he had 4 years ago. This time, the economy is healthy. 4 years ago, Perot was able to really do something with that issue. And also, you have to say, he hasn't worn very well with his followers. Many of them have simply deserted him.
One other question, why it's so important to Mr. Perot, because if he doesn't reach what, he doesn't get financing next time round.
He has to be above 5%, and I think he'll be above 5%. But again, only a shadow of where he was 4 years ago.
Okay, Hal, thanks very much. Hal Bruno, and just to revisit it very briefly, we are now saying that the Senate race in New Hampshire is too close to call, and we will be back in a minute or so from now to talk to George Will. We're waiting for Senator Dole, who has not conceded. His press secretary is very careful to tell us in the second statement which Mr. Warfield has issued this evening. Thank you for joining us. Hope you'll stay with us.
ABC News coverage of the 96 votes will continue in a moment. ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Good evening and welcome back to our coverage of Election 96. There are still opportunities, as you know, for you in the West to go and vote, because there are House races, Senate races, governor races, and this enormous plate full of propositions which have always been more inspiring to people in the West, this citizenship democracy, than they have been in the East, and which, by the time tomorrow rolls around, always give us in the rest of the country a much, I'm sorry, not a much better, but a very clear notion of what is on people's minds, on everything from social issues to term limits, to hunting, to, of course, the major California Civil Rights Initiative on affirmative action, which the entire country is watching tonight, because in the past so many important trends have started in California. So that is our way of urging you to vote. You can take a look at our electoral map as of to now and see what it looks like. The yellow, if that's what it looks like on your home screen, is still too close to call. The blue is for Mr. Clinton, the red is for Mr. Dole. Mr. Clinton has 291 electoral votes as of now. We projected him to be re-elected some time ago. And the big battle continues to be, of course, and the greatest interest this evening continues to be about what is going to happen in the House and the Senate. We think at the moment that the The Senate is going to pretty much stay the way it has been. That is to say, it's going to retain, or the Republicans are going to retain control in the Senate. But the House is a very, very interesting and important story at the moment. In fact, positively exciting, and Koki, tell us why.
It is entirely exciting. Look at the total numbers right now, Peter. We've got 154 Democrats winning. You've got 168 Republicans winning. That at the moment is a net gain for the Democrats of 5 seats. Now that doesn't sound like much because they need, by this number, 19 to win. But the fact is that in 1992, with Bill Clinton winning, the Democrats went into the Rocky Mountain states 20 seats behind, and then won big all throughout the West, Oregon, Washington, California. And there are a lot of seats up for grabs in California and Washington, and a couple in Oregon. So we could have a night that surprises us on the Democratic House of Representatives.
Okay, thanks, Koki, very much. In presidential matters, we can eliminate one of those great yellow marks up there on the map and say that Mississippi, which was too close to call for some time, we now project has gone to Senator Dole. This is Republican territory. Mr. Clinton never campaigned in Mississippi. In fact, Mr. Dole hasn't been there in a long time, pretty much knowing how things were going to go. Now, Mr. Dole tonight has gone from the Watergate to his headquarters in Washington, but we're not quite sure yet what his intentions are about making a concession speech. So let's check in with Jim Wooten, who is there. Jim.
Peter, I don't know when he's going to make a concession speech either, but he went from the Watergate, which is on the Potomac at the other end of the city, all the way up here nearly to Capitol Hill. It's about halfway between the White House and the Congress where he served so many years. Nelson Warfield's earlier statement about a Dole concession has now, as you reported, been withdrawn. I can well imagine, though I do not know, that the Republican National Committee in the form of Haley Barbour must have been on the phone immediately, given all those seats in California that are up for grabs that Koki mentioned. You don't issue a concession at whatever time it was, 9:10 or 9:15. So I think we can rest assured, though, that one of the things Senator Dole brought with him here to the Renaissance Hotel is a copy of a concession speech.
Okay, thanks so much, Jim. Republicans perhaps remembering President Carter in 1980, who made his concession speech, which was what set off this great firestorm about projections and whether or not it had an effect in California. I remind you, there's still ample opportunity to vote in California, and many people in the country this year, even those who have complained about the projections which the networks have been making, and which can be found, by the way, in a variety of other places, that much of the voter turnout has been driven by issues and races which are below the presidential level. We would like to tell you something about turnout at the moment. We don't know very much. The only place, we've had any sense of it at all is in Kentucky. We haven't even had all of the results in from Kentucky, but very close to 100% returns into Kentucky, which closes fairly early. And actually, we projected it for Mr. Clinton some time ago, but in fact, the turnout in Kentucky this year, we take a close look, with about 95% of the vote in, says that 47% of the voting age population has turned out, as opposed to 1992, when 54% of the voting age population turned out. It tells us nothing about the rest of the country. It only tells us something about Kentucky. Want to check in at Democratic National Headquarters in Washington, where Michelle McQueen is standing by. Michelle, we have heard a couple of times here tonight about pressure on Mr. Clinton to fulfill some promises made. Do I hear reports of infighting in Democratic Party already?
Well, Peter, the cigars have long since come out here, and there's even been some dancing in the aisles. But this is well, you can't tell right now, but this has been a rather subdued affair here. And I think that could be because many of the people who are here tonight are people who have the most reason to be disappointed with the president. You have members of labor unions who are disappointed with his support for the NAFTA agreement. You have members of the gay and lesbian community who've been disappointed with the president's support of the Defense of Marriage Act. And one of the things they've been telling us here tonight is that they are going to be expecting President Clinton to support more of their issues in his upcoming term. And that could be a sign of some conflict, particularly given that it doesn't appear right now that the Congress is going to be in Democratic terms.
Okay, thanks very much, Michelle McQueen. As things continue there throughout the evening, we'll come back to you. In a moment, we're going to sort of eavesdrop on their dialogue. America's most publicly contentious, privately loving political couple, Mary Madeline and James Carville. We'll be right back.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues. From World Headquarters in New York, Peter Jennings.
Good evening, and we wish to make another projection before our political conversation here continues. After being too close to call for some time, we now project that Virginia is going to go for Mr. Dole. Democrats running for President rarely campaign in Virginia. Mr. Clinton was there at the end of October. Conservative state hasn't voted for Democrat since the Johnson landslide in 1964. We project that it will go to Mr. Dole, and that changes the electoral count slightly. 291 for President Clinton and 126 for Mr. Dole. Now, virtually all Americans, I think, who follow politics closely know the names James Carville and Mary Madeline. He, the Democrat, she, the Republican. I'm told by Mr. Carville, who's with us in New York, his wife is in Washington, that they haven't spoken much this evening. So what would you be saying to each other if you were alone at the moment? Mr. Carville.
Well, I'd say, first of all, I'd say I thought that Dole fought a gallant fight. They had some disloyal snakes in the Republican Party that turned on him, but given us the campaign and the job the president's done in the state economy, he had a tough job ahead of him. I would have said I really thought that the White House has done a wonderful job, the staff. I had a chance to talk to the President and Ms. Clinton earlier and have a chance to congratulate them, and would congratulate the White House staff and the Clinton-Gore campaign, Peter Knight, and those guys did a heck of a job. I'd congratulate them, and I'd also congratulate Senator Dole and Congressman Kemp. I thought they put up a good fight. It was some tough odds they were up against. They had some tough sledding to do, but the election is in, and I hope we can all get together and work together. And I also would say this House thing is just a little too early to tell. We'll have to see what happens out on the West Coast. It's going to be very close.
And Mary Madeline Washington, your contribution.
Well, congratulations, of course, to President Clinton. James is right. The White House did do a masterful job at campaigning. They've done nothing but campaign as opposed to govern for the last 4 years. And we're very proud of Senator Dole. I just left the Dole headquarters for running an honorable and honest campaign. The good news is, despite what you're projecting there about the House, I don't know how Koki's counting, but we show here a pickup of 5 Democratic open seats. We've only lost 1 freshman. We show about 3 pickups so far on the Senate. It's still a long night to go. But the good news is, as it has for the last 2 years, the Republican Congress will continue to set the agenda. The president has followed that agenda to a re-election victory. I guess that's a good news of sorts, and I'll expect he'll follow it if he continues if he expects to have any kind of legacy.
Mary, let me interrupt you both for just a second because Cokie Roberts has news.
Right. There are more freshmen than that who have lost, but the fact is that our models now, and these are based on key precincts reporting all over the country, our model now shows that the Republicans will maintain control of the House of Representatives.
Okay, thank you very much, Cokie Roberts. James, response to that?
Well, if that's the case, we'll have to deal with it. We'll maintain control of the presidency, and they'll maintain control of the House. And if they do, my congratulations to them, just like my congratulations to the president and the vice president, and my congratulations to the people that won tonight in the Senate. But I would have preferred a different result. If that model is true, it's a result that we'll have to live with, just like they'll have to live with the fact that the president's reelected.
Talk to me a little bit about the campaign, but first let me bring in ABC's Jeff Greenfield here for your observations about the campaign. Jeff?
Well, it just struck me, Peter, that in Senator Dole, you have a kind of symbol of why America is different from most other countries. If we had a parliamentary system, Bob Dole would have been prime minister years ago. He is a respected Senate leader. More than that, members of both parties really revere this guy. But as Richard Nixon once said, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. And one thing that Senator Dole never quite got the hang of was to campaign in poetry. He was gifted legislatively, but rhetorically challenged. And he was running against a man who was one of the really skilled campaigners of our time. And it did strike me that in some sense, Senator Dole may almost have done himself a disservice by leaving the Senate, where he was such a giant, to walk in an area and to campaign in an arena that he was so unfamiliar and unsure of. That's a nonpartisan observation.
Okay, well, we're going to come back and talk about that again with Mary Madeline and James Carville. Could the Republicans have done better? Should Bob Dole never have left the Senate? It's been a question raised before this evening. Hope you'll stay with us. We'll be right back.
ABC News live coverage of the 96th vote will continue in a moment. ABC News live coverage of the 96th vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Just to repeat what Cokie Roberts said a few minutes ago, based on a mathematical model that our political numerical analysts have put together over the last weeks and months, we now estimate, or project, I suppose is a more accurate word, the Republicans will retain control of the House of Representatives. And Cokie, you've got a really interesting race in New York, which a lot of people around the country watch.
Right, despite the fact that we're saying Republicans will retain it, this is a Democratic pickup of a seat. This is the seat where the Democrat, Carolyn McCarthy, had been a Republican, but her husband was killed on the Long Island Railroad, and the Republican, Dan Friese, had voted against the ban on assault weapons. It made her so mad that she decided that she was going to do something about it. She tried to run for Congress as a Republican. There's still a Republican machine in Long Island, New York. They shut her out. So she switched parties, ran as a Democrat, and she has won tonight. Carolyn McCarthy has won in New York. And another upset in Connecticut, where Gary Franks has been in the House for a couple of terms, an African-American Republican, one of two in the House. He has lost tonight. So despite the fact that we're showing Republicans holding the House, they've had a couple of important losses.
Okay, Cokie, thanks so much. I want to go up to the other side of our election headquarters briefly to check in with Anderson Cooper. You've been covering the so-called youth vote, which I guess goes 18 to 34, right, this year. How frustrated are they by what they have seen this year?
I think there's a lot of frustration out there. I mean, you talk to people who voted for Clinton in '92, and a lot of young people did vote for Clinton in '92, and a lot of them say that they haven't seen the change that they voted for, that there hasn't been, you know, the mandate for change that they wanted. And then you talk to young people who, you know, are Republican, and there's not a lot of excitement there about Bob Dole. I mean, a lot of the issues that Bob Dole was speaking to, Social Security, Medicare, really didn't resonate very well with young voters. And,
as you take their pulse, as you have all year, is this the kind of election result which keeps them engaged or turns them off?
It turns them off. I mean, you know, it's too early now to tell turnout of young people, but we really expect it to be very low. In fact, you know, it's kind of ironic or pathetic, I guess, how you look at it. This is the 25th anniversary of the 26th Amendment, giving 18 to 21-year-olds the right to vote. And also with Motor Voter, you actually have more registered young people than ever before. And yet, you know, it would be surprising if large numbers of them actually came out this year.
Okay, Anderson, thanks very much. Not by any means at the other end of the political spectrum by any means. I'm going to check in Washington with ABC's George Will, who has just joined us now. George, some observations on Mr. Dole's defeat?
Well, Mr. Dole's defeat is, of course, a setback for the Republican Party. But, Peter, I must say, I think if the ABC model is correct, as Cokie reports it, and if the Republicans hold the House of Representatives, having gained 10 seats in '92 and 52 in '94, and being poised by all historic precedent for a contraction of their strength, if they continue to hold the House, that means that Bill Clinton will be president for 8 years, 6 of them with a united Republican control of Congress. And given what looks like congressional supremacy, a restoration of this in American history, this is, I frankly think, the conservative ascendancy that began 30 years ago tonight is picking up steam tonight.
And does this mean, in your view, gridlock, George, for the next 4 years?
It means more than gridlock. I think Mary Maitland put it right, which is that the Republicans have set the agenda in Congress for the last 2 years and will continue to do so.
On the other hand, it was Bill Clinton at the news conference, in January of 1994, who felt compelled to say to the public that he was still relevant. Judge his relevancy for us now.
Well, I think he still has that problem. In the last 2 years, he has been essentially cut out of governing and has done instead what he does best, which is campaign. But what does he campaign for now, having acknowledged that he's just run his last election? The fact is, I think if you look at the Senate particularly, Peter, and you look at who is replacing whom, Roberts and Brownback replacing Kassebaum and Dole, Pryor replaced by Hutchinson from Arkansas, perhaps Jenkins replacing Johnson in Louisiana, Ency replacing Simpson in Wyoming. Not only is the Republican contingent in the Senate getting larger, it's getting more conservative, and it's indeed possible that the Senate will be more conservative than the House.
And what does one of President Clinton's closest advisors have to say about this? George Stephanopoulos has just joined us in Little Rock. Mr. Stephanopoulos, have you been listening?
I sure have, and I have to say I'm not sure that George's analysis is exactly on tonight. The fact is that the president has been governing over the last year. Just in August, we raised the minimum wage, we passed welfare reform, we passed immigration reform, we passed a health care bill when the Republicans rejected the more extreme elements of their party. And what the American people are rewarding tonight is that kind of get-it-done philosophy that the president has shown over the last 4 years.
And on the subject of models, as you know, Cookie Roberts has said, based on our analytical model, the Republicans will hold the House as well as the Senate. What is the plan in the White House for governing now?
The plan is to build on the progress we've made. The president wants to reach out and work with the Republicans, just as he did this year when the Republicans turned away from extremism. And he's going to do that no matter who controls the Congress, although I haven't given up on the House yet, Peter.
Okay. George, when's he going to speak, by the way?
Excuse me?
When is the president going to make an appearance?
We hope pretty soon, probably between 10 and 10:30 Central Time. But we want to make sure the polls are all closed before he comes out.
Okay, thanks very much. George Stephanopoulos in Little Rock. Mary Madeline, what do you think of what he has to say?
I don't know, I'm a cross between amused and really saddened that on the night that it appears that the president has won, that his chief confidant, George Stephanopoulos, is still calling the Congress with which he has to work, which he has been following their agenda, and they'll continue to set the agenda. He's still calling those people extremists. That's hardly a way to get ready to have a bipartisan government. You would think they would have more grace on this victory night.
Mr. Carville, it suggests, James Carville, no more big projects, doesn't it? No more health care reform.
Well, I guess, you know, I doubt if health care reform is going to pass in the next 2 years under this Congress. But I didn't know. I thought, in terms of George and Mary, I thought the president won tonight. I thought I'm looking at he's got 50% of the vote. Perot is down, so I thought he had a pretty good night. Truth of the matter is, when people send people to Washington, they expect them to get the job done and work together. So I suspect pretty soon the president and the leaders of the new Congress will sit down. I'm a little bit like George. These mathematical models are one thing. I just soon go back and look at the raw vote. But I'll accept that for the purpose of this. But I would just say that we've had an election tonight. I think people have shown that they have confidence in the president. I think people have shown that they have some confidence in the Congress, although I suspect that the Republican numbers in the House are going to be diminished. And we'll see where we go from there. It'll be an interesting 2 years, and there's work to get done, and I'm sure they'll get down and get it done.
Can I put up the popular vote board again? Because this is one of the questions we raised earlier this evening, whether or not the president was going to break 50%. 50% as of now, with 45% of the precincts reporting, 50% for the president, 41% for Mr. Dole, and 8% for Mr. Perot, just about reflecting, Jeff Greenfield, the way the polls had us ended
9.5
at the, I've lost Jeff Greenfield for a second.
Oh, here I am.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that the nationwide boards pretty much showed the way we ended up in the polls just before the election in terms of Clinton breaking 50%, and how important is it?
Well, I think it's much more symbolically important. I never quite understood this notion. You know, Richard Nixon got 43% of the vote in 1968 and wound up going to China. But I think for them it was important, and it deprives the Republicans of the capacity to say, well, he's had 2 terms without a majority. But you're right. I mean, this is one of those depressing cases where the pollsters were fairly close to the mark at the end of the day. I sometimes root for upsets just so that human beings can prevail, but it looks like this technology has got it pretty well wired.
Mary Madeline and George Will, to each of you the same question. Do you think the Republican Congress is going to be inclined to go for the president now, that we're going to see a whole series of investigations into one issue after the other?
Well, there's no shortage of issues, and certainly under the guise of investigating campaign finance reform, you're going to see a loving and detailed and protracted exploration of the foreign money that came into the Democratic Party this year. But the most important engine driving any further investigations of the president is not going to be a member of Congress. It's going to be Mr. Starr, the independent counsel.
Mary Madeline?
Which the Democrats understand this, and they're already attacking as they do so well. They're already attacking Ken Starr, trying to discredit him. But the truth is, Admiral Mikva, who was the president's former White House counsel, endorsed the integrity and independence of independent counsel Ken Starr. He was approved by an independent panel of 3 federal judges, and they're going to try desperately to undermine his credibility. But the truth is, he is a man of widely renowned integrity and independence, and it's too bad they're going to turn this into a political show.
George Will and then David Brinkley. In terms of the campaign itself, George, do you think that Senator Dole could have done it any other way?
I think he could have won it. I think what the closing in the final days of the campaign indicates that there was a certain softness in the support of the president. I believe if candidate Dole had adopted a somewhat different theme and stuck with the theme, run more on social issues and less on the economy, he could have won the election.
David Brinkley?
I would say that his campaign for the presidency was poorly planned. It, at times, even though I saw it close up, I could not tell what they were trying to do, could not tell what the message was. I knew what they were saying, but it didn't fit with the atmosphere. So this is very nebulous, I'm aware, and it's very easy to say something should have been done better. But then you have to say how and why. But I thought it was poorly planned, and why it was so poorly planned, I don't know.
I feel, though he's not being very blatant about it, that Sam would like to say something. Could he have done it another way, Sam, do you think?
He could have done it another way, but I don't think it would have won it, Peter. I think this was set by 2 or 3 people. I think Alan Greenspan, who is the Fed chairman, helped engineer an economy that worked, and it worked for President Clinton. I think the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, helped engineer a shutdown of the Congress twice that scared the country, and that worked against Senator Dole. It wasn't Senator Dole's fault. And I think, of course, Bill Clinton followed the advice of a man named Dick Morris. Mr. Morris is no longer at the White House, the scandal that brought him low in August. But I think Morris called it right for the president as far as the tactical winning of the election. Become a centrist, become a Republican if you have to, sign the welfare reform bill. It all worked. And I don't think Senator Dole could have done anything about it.
James Carville, quickly. 2 names that I've heard mentioned for the first time this evening. Newt Gingrich.
Right.
Was it the right thing to make him the symbol of evil? And Dick Morris. Does he really deserve all the credit that he likes to have for Mr. Clinton moving politically?
Well, I don't know if he deserves all the credit, but clearly he deserves some of the credit, as do a lot of the people in the White House in the campaign. I think I would give most of the credit to the president. I might add that this was somebody that was completely written off, that's winning a presidential election by 9 percentage points, which is a historically large number for Democrats. So I think we ought to congratulate him, too.
I have to stop you. I apologize. There'll be lots of time in the future to talk about Newt Gingrich. I want to bring folks at home just finally up to date. We're going to go off now at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, giving our local stations all across the country a chance to do their local news. We will come back a little later on. We'll certainly come back in the middle of your local news if President Clinton and or Senator Dole come out and speak to the nation. But let's take a look quickly back up there at the big board. The states won tonight by President Clinton by our projections 26. The states won by Mr. Dole 13. The electoral vote 291 for Mr. Clinton and 126 for Mr. Dole. On the Senate, our projection is that the Republican Party will hold the Senate. Our projection is that the Republican Party will hold the House. We expect the President to speak shortly after 11 o'clock in the East. When he does, as I said, we will come back. In the meantime, my thanks to everybody here who has helped us get through this evening so well so far, David Brinkley especially. We'll be back in just a while, as I said, but first of all, we're going to cut away for your local news. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings on behalf of everybody at ABC News at our election headquarters in New York.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote will continue after this from our ABC stations. This has been a special presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
When it comes to health coverage, traditional insurance lets you go to any doctor. On the up,
Sierra by GMC. See your Central Tennessee GMC dealer today.
Thank you.
Good services.
We're going to go now to Russell, Kansas. Bob Dole is making his concession speech, so let's listen in.
I was just thinking on the way down. I was thinking on the way downstairs. Thank you. I was just thinking on the way downstairs. I was thinking on the way down the elevator
tomorrow will be the first time in my life I don't have anything to do. But I wanted to come down and thank all of you. You've done a great job, and I'm very proud of Trent. We're going to keep the Senate. We're going to keep the House. We're going to... Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. Let me say that I've talked to President Clinton. We had a good visit, and I congratulated him. And I've said, no, wait a minute. No, I've said repeatedly, I've said repeatedly in this campaign that the president is my opponent, not my enemy, and I wish him well, and I pledge my support in whatever advances the cause of a better America. That's what the race was about in the first place, a better America as we go into the next century. And I'm very proud also of my teammate, Jack Kemp. I've talked to Jack, and I've thanked Jack Kemp. And I want to thank not only Jack, but his wife, Joanne, who did an outstanding job, and all the Kemp family for the work they did in this campaign. And obviously, I want to thank two outstanding women. My daughter, Robin, you did a great job. And of course, my wife, Elizabeth, who's traveled this country. From one end to the other. In fact, they've both been with me in this 96-hour marathon. And we had a great time. We had great crowds and a lot of enthusiasm. At 3 o'clock this morning, I guess it was, we're in Independence, Missouri, and I never saw so many people in one place, so excited about the Republican Party. And let me say a special word. Let me say a special word to all the young Americans and the young people who were involved in my campaign. You've been a constant source of inspiration for Elizabeth and myself. But I might add, you're not going to get that tax cut if you don't be quiet. Yeah. And I would say to the young people and all the others involved, it's a lot more fun winning. It hurts to lose an election, but stay involved and keep fighting the good fight because you are the ones who will make the 21st century the next American century. And I don't want anybody to pass out here, but I also want to thank all the media who traveled with me on the plane. And all my friends. No, come on. No, come on. Come on. All of my friends, and we have many friends in the media, and they were there every day, every night, every day, and every night as we flew around this country. And we met hundreds and thousands of good people all across America who want a better America and will continue to working for a better America. And as I looked around tonight and I came in, I saw a lot of very special people who've been helping me for the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And I say thank you for all you've done, because I know your support. Because I know that because of your support, I am still the most optimistic man in America. And I know that thousands of you have worked day and night, and millions of you trusted Jack Kemp and me with your vote, and for that, we will always be grateful, and I say thank you very much. And I would say, Haley, you've done an outstanding job. We appreciate it very much. And we've had our co-chairman flying around with us. You've done a great job. We appreciated your being with us. Thank you. And I want to say to my campaign staff, to Scott and to Jill and to Joanne and everyone else, I could not have had a better, more faithful, more loyal team. And I want to thank everybody, and we'll have an opportunity to do that in the future. It's been a long time since I entered politics, way back in 1951. And a lot of things have happened since that time, but some things never change. A few days after I took my seat in the state legislature, a reporter asked me what I had on my agenda. And I said, well, I'm going to sit back and watch for a few days, and then I'll stand up for what I think is right. And any of you wondering what my plans may be in the future, I'm going to sit back for a few days, then I'm going to start standing up for what I think is right for America and right for you. And all those who may be watching out there, the millions of people who supported us, I say thank you. We've enjoyed it. It's been a long, long campaign. I've learned a lot. I hope the American people have learned a lot. What we need to do now, as Republicans, is to come together, as we always will, keep the House. We're going to keep the House, going to keep the Senate. We're going to do what we should do for the United States of America. And I've never been prouder in my life than to have been the Republican nominee for President of the United States. So I leave you all tonight with a full heart and a fervent prayer that we will meet again, and we will meet often. In this land where miracles are always happening, where every day is a new beginning, and every life a blessing from God. So I want to say thanks to each one of you here. Thank you for all you've done and all you will do in the future for America. Thank you very much, and God bless America.
This is an...
We now join our regularly scheduled program already in progress.
Requires that presidents be chosen not by a popular vote, but by an electoral college of 538 members, distributed roughly according to populace among the 50 states and Washington, D.C. The electors never meet as a college. We call it the Electoral College, but it never happens. They gather in their own state capitals on a legally fixed day. A simple majority of 270 votes wins. As you know, a state or the district gets the same number of electors as they have elected representatives to the Congress. So it's a combination of the number of representatives in the House and the number of senators. And they are the basics you read in your history books, if you're up to date, of an old elitist system invented by the New World aristocrats who wrote the Constitution, because they rather feared that the popular vote would have a whole lot of bumpkins, as somebody once said about this, going out and casting their vote for political leaders. And they wanted the Electoral College so that wiser minds might prevail on such occasions. And that is how the Electoral College came to be in brief. There are books about it. Jeff Greenfield wrote a whole novel recently about it. But there's the short version as to why we have an Electoral College in America. Not bad, eh?
No, that's very
Thanks,
good.
David.
It's all you need to know.
We'll be right back after this message.
ABC News coverage of the 96 vote will continue in a moment. ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues once again from New York. Peter Jennings.
Welcome back to our coverage of Politics 96. We have some projections to make. We go up to the Senate and Sam Donaldson.
That's right, Peter. Let's project some of the Senate races, including one that you talked about as Senator Dole was about to begin his speech. That's the state of Oregon, where we project that Tom Berger, the Democrat, has won that seat, and that's a switch, because Mark Hatfield, the retiring senator, was a Republican, and that's a switch, meaning the Democrats have picked up one there. In Louisiana, Mary Landrieu, we project, has contained the damage for the Democratic side. She has maintained the seat that Bennett Johnston, a Democrat, held before his retirement. Mary Landrieu, we think, is the winner in Louisiana. In Maine, we project that Susan Collins, a Republican, has held that seat for the Republicans. It was Bill Cohen's, and he's retiring, and so she has won there, we believe. And in South Dakota, here's another switch. We believe that Tim Johnson has won that Senate seat and defeated the incumbent Republican Senator Larry Pressler. Now, that would leave a net gain for the Republicans in our tote board of about 1 so far. But it is still mathematically impossible now for the Democrats to win the Senate, even if they won every one. And finally, we are willing to call New Hampshire. And after a long night, Peter, we believe that Republican Senator Bob Smith has retained his seat in New Hampshire. It's tough going, at least for us, in this race, because it got very, very narrow. But we think now we can project that Bob Smith has retained the seat, which means the Republicans would pick up 2 Senate seats. Now, there are still 2 or 3 races outstanding. I guess there are 2 races outstanding that are too close to call at this point, and the polls have not closed in Alaska, where Senator Ted Stevens is bidding for re-election. He was way ahead in the tracking polls before the election today. But we have not called that race because the polls have not closed there. That's at least one of the reasons.
Sam, give us a clue to the main one. Susan Collins,
Susan Collins,
a former aide to Senator Cohen.
Yeah, she was a former aide of Senator Cohen's, and she worked in the state, and she held offices in the state. Her opponent was a former Democratic governor, Joe Brennan. At one point, it looked like he might win. As the days wore down, however, Susan Collins came back, and she's retained the seat.
Sometimes said he'd been around just too long, right?
Well, I don't want to be one to talk about being long in the tooth, Peter. I mean, I'm getting there, so I'm not going to accuse Joe Brennan of being that. He and Susan Collins ran against each other for the governorship 2 years ago. There was also a fellow named Angus King in the race. He was the independent. Angus King won. So in this rematch now, at least Susan Collins goes to the Senate.
And the Democrats got Senator Pressler. He was regarded as the most endangered member of the species ever since the beginning of the campaign.
That's right. I mean, the people were down on Larry Pressler, and Larry Pressler fought back. He accused his opponent of being just too liberal. A fellow named Arthur Finkelstein, who does these things for Republicans and for years has been saying to them, you accuse your Democratic opponent of being too liberal, and they did it. But Tim Johnson in that state was a popular Democratic congressman who had run statewide many times, and it just didn't stick.
I want to tell our local stations we're not going to go to the local cutaway this time because we're waiting for President Clinton and for Vice President Gore to show up to make their victory speeches. But Sam, if you'll forgive me, for the next Senate seat, I want to come down to Koki because her home state is Louisiana, and Woody Jenkins losing to Mary Landrieu there has a great story behind it, doesn't it? Including the very late involvement of the Roman Catholic Church.
Indeed, it has. It was a very, very close race. Mary Landrieu has been state treasurer. She's the daughter of a beloved mayor, former mayor of New Orleans, Moon Landrieu, former HUD secretary under Jimmy Carter. And she had run for the Senate, alienated a black candidate for the Senate, Cleo Fields, who she did not endorse in the runoff against the Republican who did win, Mike Foster, who's now the Republican governor of the state. And so it was hard for her to patch things together in the black community, and then add to that the fact that the former Archbishop of New Orleans, Philip Hannon, who has long been a voice for liberalism in the state, said that it would be tantamount to a sin to vote for her because of the issue of abortion. But still, she seems to have squeaked it out. And Peter, I have to say to you that this means that there are now more women in the Senate than ever before in history if Susan Collins and Mary Landrieu have won. Nancy Kassebaum resigned, but that's still a gain of 1. And that means 9 women in the United States Senate, which is 9%. Much more than we have ever seen in our history in the United States Senate.
Okay, now give us the big news, if you would, Cokie, about the House.
And in the House of Representatives, where we are trying to keep a running total, we see now out of the total, the number to gain the majority of the House is 218. Right now, we say that the Republicans have won 204 seats already tonight. The Democrats have won 189 seats. That means so far a net gain of 5 for the Democrats, and our ABC News model is projecting that Democrats will pick up 10 seats. That will be short of allowing them to get a majority. And then those freshmen, those Gingrich, that Gingrich class of 1994 that we've been watching so closely, the Democrats trying to pick off. There were 71 of them up for re-election. So far, 34 of them have won, 5 of them have lost. So it looks like the Republicans will squeak it out in the House.
We've been waiting for Mr. Gingrich to talk to us for some time, by the way. He's told us he will not until the shape of the House becomes utterly clear. And I don't want to beat your Louisiana roots to death here, but
it's fine.
this business of a woman
at the end of the evening.
This business of a woman and a liberal or liberalish woman winning in Louisiana will be enormous news in that state, won't it?
It is very big news, and she had a lot of opposition. She had opposition not only from the Archbishop and from members of the black community. She also did from a longtime Democratic force, Edwin Edwards, who was governor of the state for a while. So it's been tough for her, but she's made it apparently.
Well, it was deemed at one point in his history to be tough for Bill Clinton, but the master campaigner is about to make an appearance in Little Rock with Mrs. Clinton and daughter Chelsea by his side. Ruffles and flourishes. Touches there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, Mrs. Gore, and the Gore family.
Well, clearly the second most powerful man in the White House now, without any doubt, Vice President Gore. People who work in the White House talk about power having shifted his way in recent months. A man who is said to have learned a great deal about his public appearance, his ability to campaign from President Clinton on the stump this year, who was at one point during this last 96 hours so enthusiastic about the president that the president wanted to know publicly what he'd eaten for breakfast. David Brinkley, you're looking at a man here of 50 years old, President Clinton, who's run for president for the last time. It's quite strange.
He'd run for anything the last time. He had a little something to say about it himself. Bob Dole began his little concession speech by saying for the first time in his life he had nothing to do. He's going to have the same problem here. He will have nothing to do. He will be president, but he will not be campaigning. Even when he was president, these 4 years, he campaigned every day. Never stopped. Never stopped. Now he has nothing to do except to run the office of president and do what needs to be done there. No more campaigning.
Britt Hume, I think, is with us in Little Rock this evening. Britt, you there?
I sure am, Peter. Can you
I hear
imagine
a great echo. I hope it's just my ear and Mr. Brinkley's. But go ahead, please.
Can you imagine what this must feel like to both Gore and Clinton, Peter? Particularly when you think how far down Mr. Clinton seemed to be just 2 years ago. For him to ascend to this pinnacle again is the act of truly a master politician. Agile, smart, talented.
We're hearing, I must confess, here in New York, recorded music. I'm not sure that's what they're hearing in
Yes, it is,
Little Rock.
Peter.
Okay, that is at the event itself.
Yes, it is at the event. It's the fanfare for the common man. I don't think either of these two men feel like common men tonight.
First from Vice President Gore.
This evening, before I present the President, I would like to thank the people who made this glorious evening possible. My wife, Tipper, who has campaigned from one end of the country and back again with flair and passion. My 4 children, Corinna, Kristen, Sarah, and Albert, who have filled our lives with love and our hearts with pride. I would like to thank my parents who have set a standard of excellence and integrity in public service that has always inspired me. My brother-in-law, Frank Hunger, a wise and trusted friend. On behalf of the President and myself, I'd like to thank Peter Knight, the best campaign manager ever, and a campaign staff that worked harder and more effectively than any in history. And on a personal note, I would like to thank the people of my home state of Tennessee for giving us a victory this evening. And may I say, on behalf of Tipper and myself, to a very dear friend, and on behalf of millions of families in villages throughout our land, a very special thank you to a woman who has faced extraordinary pressures with grace, dignity, and an unbreakable commitment to serving our nation, America's First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton. A few blocks from here, in the summer of 1992, then Governor Bill Clinton asked me to be his running mate. It has been my great privilege to work by his side these past 4 years, and I want you to know I have gotten to know him as very few others have. I have seen him lift and carry burdens of unimaginable weight, day after day after day. I've heard him ask over and over again, what is right for the American people? I've seen him stand hour upon hour, comforting American families who have lost loved ones in natural disasters, wretched acts of terror, and in service to our country. I've seen him go on working for the American people from before dawn to well after midnight, however difficult the challenge, however towering the obstacles, however long the odds. That takes strength. That takes vision. That takes leadership. That takes character. The Bible says, by their fruits ye shall know them. On this night 4 years ago, on this very spot, I said we felt good having won an election, but even better at having been granted the chance to change a country. Much has changed since we last gathered here, and it has changed because of the resolve and determination of the American people under Bill Clinton's leadership. Under President Bill Clinton, We have forged a new prosperity, putting our financial house in order while restarting the great American jobs machine. We have deepened our ethic of environmental stewardship and redoubled our commitment to protecting God's creation. We have secured our place in the world by helping to bring peace and reconciliation to lands scarred by hatred's savage hand, and by speeding the spread of democracy and free markets across the globe. We have moved to redeem the promise of representative democracy by reinventing the processes of self-government to make them work better and cost less. And we have begun the task of restoring faith and responsibility to the American community by keeping our streets safe and our values secure. Under Bill Clinton, the United States of America is not just better off, it's better. Now, 4 years later, we again celebrate a victory. But what we savor much more is the opportunity you have given us once again to lift our country higher still. And from where we stand tonight, we can now see the shimmering rays of light that signal the dawn of the 21st century. We see an America that is preparing and empowering all of its people and giving them opportunities to succeed. We see an America in which success does not depend on how others categorize you, but upon what is in your heart. An America in which talented teachers shepherd dedicated students through the best schools in the entire world, where an 8-year-old can pick up a book and read it on his or her own. An America in which higher education is open to all and affordable by all. From our vantage point tonight, we see an America where every child can connect to the information superhighway and absorb the vast knowledge of a small planet. An America where any person with a good idea and the desire to work can enter the new networked economy and become tomorrow's successful entrepreneur. An America where the greatest scientists in the world continue to make discoveries.
While the Vice President continues to make his concession speech, we interrupt briefly to acceptance speech. Did I say concession speech? My apologies. His victory speech, I guess, or as some people would argue, his first political speech of the 2000 campaign. At any rate, we interrupt briefly to tell you that we now are in a position to make another projection at the presidential level, which is that President Clinton is going to win the 8 electoral votes in Arizona. Arizona holds a record in national politics, has not voted for a Democrat since 1948. It is close, and we're looking at 42% of the precincts reporting, but it's the longest string of voting for one party, Arizona. The Democrats were very optimistic this year. Mr. Clinton made 3 visits to Arizona after the convention, but then so did Senator Dole, for that matter. There's the electoral vote count. Arizona, of course, one of the fastest growing states in the nation, all with the blessings and curses that go with it. And while we're looking at some numbers, or at least talking about some numbers before the President speaks here, ABC News now projects that the turnout for the entire presidential election this year is going to be 49%. That's a projection we make. I can tell you now, just looking at some of it, that the turnout is down. 49% would make it the lowest since 1924. In 1988, it was 50%, and it began to crest back up somewhat after that. 1980, 50%, the last really low turnout. 1992, it was back up to 55%, and our projection is now that it's going to be 49%. And so what you see is the voter apathy, the voter disenchantment, which we talked about so often throughout the year, reflected in the voter turnout. Here's some real numbers. New Hampshire, in the presidential race, 70% of the vote is in. The turnout tonight was 56% of the voting age population. In the 92 presidential race, it was 63%. In, for example, Indiana, in the presidential race, with almost 90% of the vote in, 52% of the voting age population turned out tonight. Not much different, 55% in 1992. In Kentucky, 47% of the voting age population turned out tonight, very low. 92 it was 54%. So it looks like the enthusiasm for this campaign was about where people said it really was. The polls have now closed in Alaska, and we are now projecting that Senator Dole is the winner in Alaska. And on the Senate side in Alaska, we are projecting that the incumbent Senator Ted Stevens, who's been seeking a 5th term, he was running against something of a flake, has been reelected. His opponent, Teresa Obermeyer, was released from federal prison where she'd served a 30-day sentence for disorderly conduct because she liked to disrupt Senator Stevens' events. But we project Alaska for Dole, and here is the president.
Thank you for being here. Just 4 years from now, we will enter a new century of great challenge and unlimited possibility. Now, we've got a bridge to build, and I'm ready if you are. Today, the American people have spoken. They have affirmed our course. They have told us to go forward. America has told every one of us, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, loud and clear, it is time to put politics aside, join together, and get the job done for America's future. In the last 4 years, we've made remarkable progress. But in our schools, our families, our workplaces, and our communities, our journey is not done. My fellow Americans, we have work to do, and that's what this election was all about. I want to say to all of you here and to all of the American people, no words can convey the gratitude I feel tonight for the honor that has been given to me. It is an honor that belongs to many. First, to my family, to my wonderful wife of 21 years, who from the day I first met her began teaching me that it does take a village to raise our children and build our future. To our daughter Chelsea, for understanding the work we have done together, the burdens it has imposed. Today, I went down to the train station to vote in the last election in which I will appear on the ballot. And as I have done in every year since she was born, I took Chelsea to the ballot with me. And as we looked at the ballot together and discussed the issues there, I thank God that I was born an American. I thank the members of my wonderful family who are here, my stepfather Dick Kelly, my wonderful mother-in-law Dorothy Rodham, and all the others. And I thank my beloved mother who is smiling up there and said, I never had a doubt. I always knew it would be this way. I thank the friends of my lifetime. There are people who have stood with me through thick and thin, who started with me in grade school and junior and senior high school, in college and all across the years since. Friends who knew me and knew my dreams and stood as a powerful force against those who sought to stop America's progress with the politics of personal destruction. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for what you did for America. I thank the people of my beloved native state. I would not be anywhere else in the world tonight. In front of this wonderful old Capitol that has seen so much of my own life and our state's history. I thank you for staying with me so long, for never giving up, for always knowing that we could do better. I thank the finest vice president this country has ever seen. Because of Al Gore, we have a stronger and more secure relationship with the democratic Russia. We are exploring the wonders of new technologies for the benefit of America. We are protecting our environment, and we have reinvented America's government so that it does more with less, thanks to his leadership. It is a legacy unique in the history of this republic. I thank Tipper for her friendship, for her crusades on behalf of our children and the mental health of the American people, and for always standing with us along with her children and her family. I thank the members of our administration, the cabinet members, the members of the White House staff, I thank all those who are part of the permanent service to the President at the White House and the medical staff. I thank especially my Secret Service detail that has been so challenged by a president determined not to be isolated from the American people. I thank the members of our campaign staff, all those who have served in this election and the work you have done. I thank the leaders of our party in the Congress and the state houses. I thank all those who stood for what we believe in these elections today, those who won and those who did not. You did a service to America by raising the things in which we believe, and I thank you all and wish you Godspeed. I want to thank the employees of the nation's government. They have had to do a remarkable job. We have reduced the size of our government to its smallest point since President Kennedy served, and yet they have continued to serve the people better year in and year out. They had to do it in the face of enormous challenges and outright hatred for momentary periods. They had to live with the horror of Oklahoma City and the difficulties that came along the way. But the people who serve us deserve our thanks, and I thank them. I thank those who served this administration and our cause, who are no longer here tonight, and one especially I must thank, my friend and brother Ron Brown. You're looking down on us, and I know you're smiling too. On a purely personal note, I must thank my pastor, Rex Horn, who prayed with me before I came out here tonight, and all the ministers and people of God who prayed for me and with me over these last 4 years. There were a few especially, and they know who they are, who came to the White House time after time in good times and bad. When the times were bad, they reminded me that God gave St. Paul a thorn in his flesh so he would not become exalted in his own eyes. And that certainly was not a problem for me in the bad times. When the times were good, they reminded me that humility is always in order in the presidency, for in this life we see through a glass darkly, and we cannot know the whole truth of our circumstances or the motives of those who oppose us. I thank them all for bringing me closer to God and to the eternal wisdom without which a president cannot serve. I would like to say a special word of thanks to Senator Dole, and I ask you to join me in applause for his lifetime of service to the United States. And I thank Jack Kemp for his service to America and his devotion to the proposition that this is a country in which everyone should have a chance to live free and equal and to have a chance at success. Let me say, I had a good visit with Senator Dole not too long before he went out to speak. I thanked him for his love of our country, for his years of service. I applauded the campaign that he fought so bravely to the very last minute. I thanked him for the work we did together to advance the common cause of America. And on behalf of all Americans, I wish him well and Godspeed. 4 years ago, on these very steps, we set forth on a journey to change the course of America for the better, to keep the American dream alive for everyone willing to work for it, to keep America the world's strongest force for peace and freedom and prosperity, to come together as one American community. The time was one of widespread frustration and doubt about our economic and social problems, about our ability to deal with the vast sweep of change that was all around us. The scope and pace of those changes were threatening to many, and our values seemed to be under attack on all sides. But together, you and I vowed to turn our country around with a strategy to meet our challenges and protect our values. Opportunity for all, responsibility from all, an American community of all Americans. We have worked hard to end the politics of who's to blame, and instead to ask, what are we going to do to make America better? Tonight, we proclaim that the vital American center is alive and well. It is the common ground on which we have made our progress. Today, our economy is stronger, our streets are safer, our environment is cleaner, the world is more secure, and thank God our nation is more united. To all the men and women across this country who have created our jobs, taught our children, patrolled our streets, and kept America safe throughout our world, I say America's success is your success. This victory is your victory. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, my fellow Americans, a vast new century lies before us. It will be a time more full of opportunity for people to live out their dreams than any in human history. We have committed this night to continuing our journey, to doing the hard work that will build our bridge to the 21st century, to give the young people here and those all across America the America they deserve, and their children and their children's children. But we have work to do. We have work to do to keep our economy growing steady and strong by balancing the budget while we honor our duties to our families, our parents, and our children, and our duty to pass on to our children the earth God gave us. We have work to do to give all of our children the gift of an education, to make sure every 8-year-old can read, every 12-year-old can log on to the internet, and yes, every single 18-year-old in this country willing to work for it can have a college education. We have work to do to make the permanent underclass in this country a thing of the past, to lift our fellow citizens who are poor from the degradation of welfare dependency to the pride and dignity of work. We have work to do to strengthen our families, to help our parents succeed at home and at work, to keep our children safe from harm in their schools, their streets, their homes, and their communities, to clean up our environment so that our children grow up next to parks, not poison, to tell them that drugs are wrong and illegal and they can kill them, to teach them right from wrong. My fellow Americans, I will do all I can to advance these causes, but all our citizens must do their part to continue the upsurge of personal responsibility that in the last 4 years has brought crime to a 10-year low, child support collections to an all-time high, and reduced the welfare rolls. Will you help me do that? We must do it together. We must make our democracy stronger by enacting real, bipartisan campaign finance reform. Talk is no longer enough. We must act and act now, and the American people will be watching the leaders of both parties to see who is willing not just to talk, but to act. I am willing to act, and I ask others to join me. And we must keep America the world's indispensable nation, finishing the unfinished business of the Cold War, meeting the new threats to our security through terrorism and the proliferation of dangerous weapons, and seizing these extraordinary opportunities to extend our values of peace and democracy and prosperity. Every American here tonight and every American within the sound of my voice can take pride in the fact that in these last few years, for the first time in all of human history, a majority of the human beings living on this globe live under democracies where the people rule. The challenges we face, they're not Democratic or Republican challenges, they're American challenges. What we know from the budget battles of the last 2 years and from the remarkable success of the last few weeks of this Congress is the lesson we have learned for the last 220 years. What we have achieved as Americans of lasting good, we have achieved by working together. So let me say to the leaders of my Democratic Party and the leaders of the Republican Party, it is time to put country ahead of party. We do not know the final outcome of the congressional elections, but we know this: the races are close. The American people have been closely divided. The Congress, whatever happens, will be closely divided. They are sending us a message: work together, meet our challenges, put aside the politics of division, and build America's community together. On this beautiful night, when we have shared so much joy and so much music and so much laughter and so much pride, it is hard for me to believe that it was 23 years ago when I first began to go to the people of Arkansas to ask for their support. The most lasting and important thing that I have learned in all those 23 fleeting years is this: when we are divided, we defeat ourselves. But when we join our hands and build our families and our communities and our country, America always wins. What we need to do is to do the work of America the way we seek to do the work of raising our children and doing our work and supporting our religious institutions and our community institutions. If we would simply be Americans the way we seek to live in all of our other roles, there is no stopping America. Our best days are still ahead. And so, I say, when we look into our hearts and simply ask what is right for the American people and the future of our children, when we set aside our differences and build on our shared values of faith and family and work, when we roll up our sleeves and work together, America always wins. And my fellow Americans, America is going to keep winning these next 4 years. Let me say that, as all of you here from my native state know, I believe this and I have tried to live by it, because there is no person in America who has been given more gifts than I have. There is no person in America tonight who feels more humble in the face of this victory than I do. 50 years ago, when I was born in a summer storm to a widowed mother in a small town in the southwest part of our state, it was unimaginable that someone like me could have ever become president of the greatest country in human history. It has been, for me, a remarkable journey, not free of failure, but full of adventure and wonder and grace. I have worked hard to serve, but I did not get here on my own. Every step along the way, for these last 23 years and long before, there was a teacher, a doctor, a neighbor, a parent, a friend, a wife, a daughter, who always had time to care, who always tried to give me instruction and encouragement, and who never gave up. I got here tonight, my fellow Americans, because America gave me a chance. That is what all the children of America deserve. Our people have to give them the tools, to give them not a guarantee, but that real chance to live up to their God-given potential. And I ask you to join me in that commitment. Every child deserves the main chance that I was given. And so I say, again, let us resolve to run our country the way we tried to run our lives. Whether you are of the party of Thomas Jefferson or the party of Abraham Lincoln, whether you're an independent or unaffiliated, remember that we all belong to the greatest nation in history. To us, much has been given and much is still expected. We must rise to the challenge of building that bridge to the 21st century. Tonight is a night for joy, not just for us here, but for all Americans. For the 53rd time in our history, our people have made their quiet and deliberate decision. They have come together with their powerful voice and expressed their will. Tonight we celebrate the miracle of America. Tomorrow we greet the dawn and begin our work anew. I am more grateful than I can say. You have given me an opportunity and a responsibility that comes to few people. I will do my best, and together we will build that bridge to the 21st century. Thank you, good night, and God bless America. Thank you. Thank you.
President celebrating the miracle of America, speaking of his own journey, one of adventure and wonder and joy, he says. Fireworks in Little Rock tonight, and a few, perhaps, squirms across America, just only a few, perhaps, as they hear the President mention that bridge to the 21st century just once more. I've been joined at the rail here by my colleagues, my disrespectful colleagues, I might add, and I promise you it is not a dole rail. But before we get to you, a couple of things. The President speaks in the face of low turnout, 49%. Take a look at the popular vote tonight with 69% of the precincts reporting. The President has not yet reached that symbolic 50%, which he would very much like to reach. And as we now turn to Lynn Sure, who monitors our exit polls, we hear that there are serious anxieties, right, Lynn, about a second Clinton term?
Well, indeed, Peter, not to rain on the President's parade, but more than half of the voters say they voted for him with reservations tonight. And there's not some really not great news for him for the future. We asked voters their feelings about what would happen in a Clinton second term, how they felt about that. Well, only 46% said that they were optimistic about a Clinton second term. More than half, 52%, said they are concerned about what the President will do in his second term. We also asked voters whether they support the Clinton agenda. In other words, what they think he wants to do in the next 4 years. Again, only a quarter, 25%, said they support the entire Clinton agenda. 36% said they support some of the Clinton agenda, and 37% a little of the Clinton agenda. And again, just to make the point that this is not a mandate for him to take a more active role with Congress and government, more than half of the voters said they think government should do less, not more, in the future. Peter?
Okay, Lynn, thanks very much. I wonder if we could take a wide shot of your room back there, because it's probably about that time of the night when we should let the public in on how clearly alone you have been in there. This is Lynn Sure in virtual reality. This is Lynn Sure as she really is.
You see what it really is. What I'm real. I guarantee you I'm real. I guarantee you the numbers were real, but everything else was little zeros and ones, computer generated. And this is kind of a blue box, if you will. And I can go about 3 steps this way and back to my middle, about 2 steps that way, and that's what I've been working in all night, Peter. It's magic by very smart people.
We admire you immensely. You clearly enjoy your own company. Please come and join us.
I'd love to.
Lynn Sherr, who's done the exit polls tonight. Just one other observation about Arkansas tonight. James Carville, one of the president's best-known political assistants, I suppose, advisors, gives the Growth Award for the last 4 years to Chelsea Clinton, which I thought was rather gracious tonight. George Will is still with us in Washington. George, some closing thoughts from you?
Well, I think that we've clearly had a good evening here for both parties with much to cheer about. I thought Mario Cuomo, rather early in the evening, Peter, said something interesting. One of the most important things done by government in the last 4 years was welfare reform. The president signed it reluctantly, and he and the vice president said, we're going to fix it after the election. It does look as though the congressional election results means that will not happen. It will be interesting to see what else can happen.
I certainly think that Mr. Cuomo thought that, George. How tough do you think it's going to be for the president? How do you think he's going to perform in the next 6 months or year?
Well, he's a lame duck, thanks to the term limitation on presidents. All presidents begin the second term as a lame duck. This is a lame duck on a short leash provided by a Congress. It does seem, as Lynn Sherr's polling data seems to indicate, that the country extended his lease on the White House with a certain air of resignation. And therefore, it depends very much on how angry many Republicans are about the nature of the campaign run against them, particularly on the issue of Medicare. There are going to be some Republicans who will say, for all this talk about a bipartisanship in general and a bipartisan commission to solve the entitlement programs, the Democrats made that their issue. They made it effectively. Now it's their toy. They should play with it on their own.
George, thank you for joining us again this evening. Our coverage would be much poorer without you. It's been nice to have you. George Will in Washington tonight. In a moment, I'll come back and talk with all of my colleagues at the bar here right after this.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
Well, you've heard us talk about sort of citizen democracy throughout the evening in various propositions in various states. There are more than 90 in about 20 states around the country, the largest number since the 1920s. You'll get a really good feel for that on your local station or in your newspaper or local radio tomorrow. But some of the ones that got a lot of national attention are Proposition 209 in California, which would eliminate most statewide affirmative action programs. People watched it very closely lest it be a signal for the rest of the nation, and it is passing by almost a 2-to-1 margin in California. Proposition 215 in California, which would allow for the cultivation and the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes when recommended by a doctor, has also passed. That doesn't come as a great surprise to anybody. In Arizona, Proposition 102, which would require juveniles of 15 years and older who are accused of murder, rape, or armed robbery to be transformed to adult courts, has passed in Arizona, very much a law and order state these days. Amendment 17 in Colorado, that's the parental rights proposition there, which has a very specific language which would give parents inalienable rights to direct and control the upbringing and the education, the values and the discipline of their children, appears at this hour to be headed for defeat. It's been very controversial in Colorado. Proposal E in Michigan, which would permit up to 3 casinos in any Michigan city that has a population of 800,000 or more, in early returns appears to be very close. And you've also heard us say several times, I think, that there have been various hunting and fishing, environmental propositions on various ballots. They all appear to be fairly close. There are 10 states which have such initiatives. In Alabama, there's actually one to protect hunting and fishing because there's been opposition from the other side. That appears to be passing. In Oregon, Measure 34, which would repeal a ban on bear and cougar hunting, appears to be failing. Now, let's try to get some final shape on the Senate. Sam, would you mind?
This just in. ABC News projects that in Colorado, Wayne Allard will be the new senator, and he will thus hold the seats for the Republicans because Hank Brown, the retiring senator, is a Republican. And that means, if our projections are correct, that the Republicans will pick up 1 seat in the United States Senate, and the next Senate will be 54 Republicans and 46 Democrats.
I think this flies in the face of almost every piece of conventional wisdom I heard before the election. Am I right?
Well, I think a lot of people did think the Republicans would hold the Senate.
No, I mean the specific numbers.
Yeah, the specific numbers, I guess so. I suppose this makes it a little tougher for the president. And there are two other things to say. If President Clinton nominates Supreme Court justices, and people have speculated that there may be anywhere from 1 to 3 justices retiring, he's going to have a tough time getting people through the Senate the Republicans don't like. And second, you remember that the constitutional amendment to balance the budget failed by 1 vote in the last Congress. It may pass in this next Congress if the Senate has its way. It failed by 1 vote in the Senate.
Koki, expectations in the House.
Let me just say one last thing on the Senate. One thing about those numbers, at one point earlier this year, much earlier, they thought they might get a filibuster-proof Senate, meaning 60 Republican senators, so the Democrats couldn't filibuster without them being able to break it. They have not gotten that.
Right.
And they've held in the face of a presidential victory. In the House, it looks like the Republicans will also hold. The Democrats will pick up about 10 seats.
Half of what they were looking for.
Half of what, and so far, out of the 218 you need for a majority, the Republicans have already won 208. So they've got the House. It looks pretty certain that they've got the House.
Okay, thank you all very much. Now, we've got some other matters to talk about, but we have one more break we're going to take. It will be our last one before our coverage begins to wrap up, so please stay with us. We'll be right back to do something quite important.
ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote will continue in a moment. ABC News live coverage of the 96 vote continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
After a very tightly fought race that we were not able to project early in the evening, we now project that the state of Georgia is going to go for Senator Dole. Very much considered early on a must-win part of his southern strategy, but where President Clinton had appealed very vigorously to the suburban voters, particularly around Atlanta, but we now project that that is going to Senator Dole. Now, I digress, or at least would like to digress for several minutes here, because this is the last election of the century, and it is the last election in which you have told us you're going to sit in this chair, and several of us would like to take this opportunity to embarrass you.
Well,
if that's
you will
okay.
fail in that enterprise.
But why don't we let Jeff Greenfield have a go at it first?
No, let me have a go at it.
Go ahead, David.
I wish to say that we all look forward with great pleasure to 4 years of wonderful, inspiring speeches, full of wit, poetry, music, love, and affection. Plus more goddamn nonsense than has ever been. The other is that...
You can't say that on the air, Mr. Brinkley.
Well, I'm not on the air. I was amused to have to read that Ross Perot...
David, let me go in the shape. We are on the air. I just want you to make sure you know.
Too bad.
Okay, fine.
Too bad. I told you I was leaving.
Fine, okay. So on you go. On you go.
Ross Perot said, in his opinion...
But we are on the air. I just wish to reaffirm that, David. Okay.
Are you serious?
I am serious, yeah.
Well, I don't have anything to say.
Well,
that's some nice lines. That's some good lines here, but I can't. But I thought this was just us here in the room.
Well, it is you know, some respects it is just sort of us, because we all wanted to gather around the bar here and to celebrate the contribution you've made to all. We've all learned so much from you, eh, Jeff?
Oh, sure.
Well, it occurs to me that Bill Clinton's journey began 40 years ago in Arkansas, when as a 10-year-old he watched the 1956 conventions on television, a couple of guys named Huntley and Brinkley, and became entranced with the idea that politics could actually be about human beings, be described in a humorous and fascinating way. And as someone who hates to admit this, but who is slightly older than the president, the first conventions I ever saw on television were the 1956 conventions. I had no idea why my parents were so turned on by politics until I saw a young man named David Brinkley make them fun. And I believe, whether you consider this an achievement or a debit, you helped create a generation of political junkies, many of whom are now in the business that you helped pioneer. So either thank you or...
That's one sin.
Well, while I was teaching them, I failed to teach them brevity. At least in one case, which I can't go into because we are on the air.
All right. But I know that Lynn wants to say something.
Well, I just wanted to...
Well, I'm going to give it over to his colleagues that deal with him on a regular basis. We'll get to them. Okay. Well, David, it's just been swell sitting here at your knee and listening and being a colleague. And I must say, if more people would listen to you, I would assume that we would not have the truly abysmal voting record that we had today, which I find very shocking. But thanks, David.
Hal.
Thank you, honey. I want to say one thing.
Hold it. It's not your turn yet. Hal Bruno, our political director, who's been an enormous source of help to us all.
He talks
dirty.
You almost did on camera what we always do off camera. You scared me there for a minute. But David, working with you has been a privilege. I was a young reporter at the time of those conventions, and the idea that I would ever have a chance to work with you was far more than anyone could dream. Thank you so much for everything and for teaching me to keep it short.
Now, Koki and Sam are going to take over the Sunday program. And,
right.
Okay, Koki.
Well, so we will continue to work with David. We don't have to say any goodbyes here.
Yeah. All right.
David and we will be together every Sunday for as long as he can stand us. That's good, because it's the best thing on Sunday mornings, and it's been one of the most blessed things in my life.
Well, you know, I was thinking, David's had two great careers when some of us are struggling desperately to have just one. The Huntley Brinkley Report on NBC, which we all watched, and then This Week with David Brinkley, which you have done now longer than the Huntley Brinkley Report.
That's right.
And I have supped at that trough for 15 years. And Koki, I love you, but I don't know whether, you know, I can earn a living without you, David.
So stick around.
That sounds like something out of King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table.
And we'll get back. We're going to get back to serious political analysis in a second.
Serious point about Bill Clinton.
Right.
And others who have been elected and come forth into a new life. Bill Clinton, he probably will do it anyway, but he never again has to shake hands and be nice to somebody he despises.
But he likes it.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid he does.
Did you hear that speech tonight? I mean,
I
he's
did.
running for something.
It was one of the worst I have ever heard.
He really did sound a bit like he was an automatic pilot.
It was totally unnecessary to begin with.
Well, you know,
everything in it he's already said 20 times.
Today we sent off a spaceship to Mars. Perhaps, you know, there will be elections there when life is found.
I think they should have a rule in politics that all speeches after midnight are limited to 5 minutes.
I want to say one last mawkish thing about David, then I want to get back to politics. But David, when I came back from overseas in 1983, I hadn't covered politics in a long time. I've told people this often, Sam and Koki have heard it, Hal, that in that first year I was back, you could have squashed me like a bug. You got me through every knothole that there was in front of us, and for which I shall be eternally grateful. Also brief. Now let's get serious. Let's do some second guessing about the Dole campaign. Jeff?
I believe that Bob Dole was a guy uniquely unsuited to run for president. And as one of the top Democrats in the Senate told me, the things that make Bob Dole a great Senate leader were precisely what made him a bad candidate. He abjures fancy words. He doesn't believe in them. He likes the phrase, I'm a workhorse, not a show horse. He's a split the difference, find the common ground guy. And I think the idea that when we look back and say, well, what could he have done? You know, there are 500 unemployed operatives in every week who say he could have done this. George Will makes the point he could have run a stronger campaign. I think a Republican could have run a stronger campaign. I don't think Bob Dole could, and that's not an attack on him in a way. It's praising him for who he is.
But Sam, there were no other Republicans around by the time he got through the primary season. Everybody had been squashed.
Yeah, the other thing that happened to him, Peter, in the Senate, when he was still the leader of the Senate, he got pushed to the right, mainly by the House Republicans. When he resigned from the Senate, at the convention, he was pushed to the right. Before that, in the primaries, his party had pushed him to the right. And he came out in an untenable position, whereas Clinton was able to get into that middle ground. And Dick Scammon said many years ago, American politics, you play it between the two 35-yard lines or you don't have a chance.
Now, you, Koch, you know him, I think, better than most of us do. When you heard these two Bob Doles at work all the time, the Senate Bob Dole and the campaign Bob Dole, what did you think?
Well, it sort of breaks your heart in a way, because there's the Senate Bob Dole, and the day he left the Senate, it really was the Senate Bob Dole. He was reaching out across the aisle. He talked about senators living and dead that he had worked with, and he talked about many more Democrats than Republicans, and he talked about the things he was proud of the Americans with Disabilities Act and saving Social Security food stamps, which he was very creative in getting going. All of the Martin Luther King holiday, those were the things you weren't hearing on the campaign trail. But I think basically Jeff's point is right. We've only had 2 people go directly from the Congress to the presidency in this century. And it's because the skills that make you a good congressional leader are terrible for a presidential candidate, and I don't think that Bob Dole could have done anything to get elected.
Sam, Bob Dole said, let me just give you a slight introduction to it. He said tonight in his concession speech, tomorrow will be the first day I get up and I don't know what to do. How will he survive?
He'll have nothing to do.
Oh, he'll survive.
Have nothing to do, sorry.
Yeah. He'll survive, but you know, I said earlier this evening I thought there was nothing he could have done. He could run a better campaign, but still the election was fixed in the sense of the economy being good, the president moving to the center and co-opting the Republicans, and the Republicans, particularly in the House, shutting down the government and scaring the country. But there's one more thing. My generation and older Americans remember World War II, and when Bob Dole took that Nazi grenade in the shoulder on April 14th, 1945, that meant something. But to the kids, with all due respect, and by the kids, I don't mean just the 18-year-olds, 40-year-olds, it's ancient history. It's like my trying to read World War I. And so when Senator Dole said he had one more mission, perhaps, I think to many voting Americans, they didn't understand that.
Yeah. I was struck by talking to veterans the other day. I was able to talk to a lot of vets in VA hospitals the other day. Not a lot, but some of them. They were rather split. Some of them acknowledged that World War II veterans were very modest about their accomplishments and didn't like to talk. But so thought Bob Dole talked too much about it. The other half thought he could have talked more.
Look at the way, yes, I'm sorry, just to offer the veterans things back to Bob Dole as Senate leader. What is extraordinary is, and what's very sad, that in this year, when the voters expressed great interest in knowing how Congress works and in getting legislation done, this man left the one job that he was just superb at. This is a year when voters said they want to see
but the
results.
Democrats were killing him at that job.
I appreciate that.
He wanted to be the leader that got things done, and the Democrats were making certain that he stopped everything.
But but he was perceived by voters as being someone that could get things done, and that's the job he walked away from.
And his own party people didn't do him any favors either in trying to get things done. He wanted to work out compromises, and they just wouldn't stand for it.
There's another thing.
What I think we're all getting at here in a way is that when you try to take on something that fundamentally you're not, voters know it. The centrist, process-oriented Bob Dole trying to sound, remember that great line, or that revealing line where he told Republicans, I'll be another Ronald Reagan if that's what you want me to be. And you contrast that with Ronald Reagan, who seemed to have an age problem when he ran, was widely derided as a guy who'd never make it in the field of president, but who knew what he was about and campaigned in poetry, as I said earlier. Some people think he governed in poetry as well. But the difference of Bob Dole trying to put on the cloak of a visionary conservative Republican who he was not, and Reagan, who was that in his bones, tells you a major difference.
Jeff has a major point here. The old Bob Dole, who didn't show up this year, was for affirmative action, saved it in the Nixon administration, was a fiscal hawk. So the new Bob Dole becomes a supply-sider. He never believed that. And I said during the campaign to people, you know, in private, I would say, don't worry. If you don't like the 15% tax cut, if you think that's the wrong thing to do. If Dole is elected president, he will veto it if Congress passes it.
Let me change. I want to change direction, Cokie. I apologize. Clinton. Okay, now we've got. Okay, then start off, because 4 years of Clinton, is the country going to enjoy it?
Yes, no.
What is your considered opinion tonight?
That's a real sentence.
Yes, no.
Have you been belling up to this bar before us?
I don't know how to get to this bar. I'm having trouble. The fact is that I wanted to talk for a little bit about Clinton in this race, and then I'll talk about 4 years. But Clinton, we're talking about Dole. The truth is, he thought, you always move to the right to get the nomination, Hal, and the Democrats moved to the left to get theirs. He thought initially that getting the nomination was all he'd need because Clinton was such a flawed president that anybody could beat him. And the fact is that Clinton did very, very well, not only in terms of coming back to the middle, but of getting his message right, and then the economy performed beautifully. And at least beautifully enough in the voters' minds. Lynn's exit poll showing it all night. And I think that it became a much harder task than he had realized. So now the next 4 years can be very problematic.
Could Bill Clinton have won without Newt Gingrich?
It would have been much harder to win without Newt Gingrich. It made it a lot easier. But what Newt Gingrich mainly did was scare off other Democrats from getting into the primaries against Clinton. That was the single most important thing that happened. If he had had a challenger in the primaries, then he would probably be history tonight.
Now, Hal Lynn told us several times how people held their noses a little bit. That's too strong when they voted for Bill Clinton, but voted with reservations about Bill Clinton. How, with that in mind, how vengeful do you think the Republican Congress will be?
Well, I think they're going to be pretty tough. The great danger is that either the president or the leaders of the Republican Congress will each think that they've got a mandate, one because they got reelected. And when that happens, they are headed for trouble. But I think there's a long shopping list of things that the Republican Congress wants to do, issues that were raised in this campaign, all types of investigations that are going to occur. There's no way of stopping it. It's like water flowing downhill.
Jeff, then Lynn.
There's one other possibility. I mean, we're talking about, well, maybe it's a bipartisan time for the great compromise. Maybe it's the battle of dueling subpoenas and press releases. But one wonders, I don't like to say it the way, I wonder whether the conservatives in Congress are going to follow the lead of people in Congress like Dan Coates from Indiana, the senator, or John McCain of Arizona, conservatives who have been saying to their colleagues, it's not enough to oppose. We have to set out a much more positive agenda. One of the things that killed the Republicans this year was the Clinton campaign was able to paint them as somehow not caring about education and kids and stuff. And so I'm wondering whether one of the things we're going to see, possibly, are some people among the conservatives in Congress kind of trying to reach out to Clinton, making an end run around.
What about Newt Gingrich? We haven't heard a word from Newt Gingrich tonight. He was going to appear, then he decided not to appear. What kind of a character is Newt Gingrich going to be?
He has a problem. He said that if he didn't retain the majority in the House,
he didn't want to serve.
He wouldn't want to serve. Now he's got the majority, but he has another problem. It's called the ethics investigation. The ethics committee, which is split down the middle, did an extraordinary thing about a month ago. An outside counsel, not an independent counsel under the law, but a counsel they'd hired, issued a report which said in almost so many words that the Speaker, in the investigation of his activities, had either withheld information from the committee or had not told the truth about it. And many people think the thing that got Bob Packwood in the Senate was not the fact that he allegedly groped 28 women over the years, but that he doctored his diaries before the Senate Ethics Committee, and they weren't going to have that. So the Speaker may have a problem in this next Congress.
And the more they investigate the Democrats, the more they'll investigate the Speaker. It will be a tit-for-tat sort of situation that will be very unpleasant.
Sounds like
one other thing to point
last
out.
comment to Lynn and David. Lynn?
Let me tell you about Newt Gingrich tonight. 60% of the people said that they had an unfavorable opinion of him in this country. And just very quickly, Peter, I'm out of my box. I still have numbers. Bill Clinton did very well with all groups, and he did better than he did in a lot last year, 4 years ago. Moderates, independents. He did very well with groups all across the board. Peter?
Thank you all very much. David, you get the last word.
Okay, fine. I'm not going to say much. Among things I admire almost near the top is creativeness. And everyone in this group has it. It shows in your work. It shows in your thinking. And it shows in your speech. What you do, what you write, what you say. And it's one reason this group is so terrific. Bill Clinton has none of it. He has not a creative bone in his body. Therefore, he is a bore and will always be a bore.
Strong letter to follow, David.
David, thank you very much for everything. Thank you very much for everything, and thank you all very much. You've made it, again, a great pleasure for me. We have an enormous technical and editorial staff who supports us. You can see some of them in the room, and they're in every corner of the building. In fact, they're in every corner of the country tonight, our technical staff particularly. I want to offer special thanks to Bob Roy, but most of all to Nancy Gabriner, who's down here in the pit below us, David, and without whom some days I think we wouldn't know what to think. Thank you for joining us, as some of you have perhaps for a lengthy period of time, even if you've joined us for part of the time. This has been Election 96. Bill Clinton has been re-elected, and the country goes on. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.
From New York, this has been ABC News live coverage of the 96th vote.